Guys, presenter's laptop sound check, presenter's laptop sound check. Clerk's laptop sound check, clerk's laptop sound check.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our General Issues Committee operating budget meeting for this March 3rd, 2022. We'll call the meeting to order officially to the public. You are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton, temporarily archived on our website. 5-minute time limit today will be adhered to, colleagues. And now for our clerk, Stephanie Paparella, we seek any changes to the agenda.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We do have added communication items 4.1 through 4.1A through 4.1G, respecting the correspondence regarding Hamilton Bike Share. Staff presentations, item 6.1, the area rating review, 6.2, the 2022 tax supported operating budget, and discussion items, financial analysis and living wage implementation options. This was a document that was already before you, but council or committee had asked for it at the last meeting on February 25th for information purposes, so I have provided it. 7.2, the 2022 business case for the Hamilton Paramedic Service 2022 to 2025 enhancement on ambulance matter, and that was deferred from the February 25th meeting. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. Any discussion on those changes to the agenda? Don't see any. So Councillor Marula will move the changes, seconded by Councillor Tom Jackson. And
it should be up now, sorry.
The vote is up, and so are some thumbs, which I know the clerks track, not me, right?
Correct.
One of those thumbs is Councillor Russ Powers, who I want to publicly thank today for making a big trade with Jaybird on chair months. That's why I'm here. So thank you.
Councillor Pauls, are you able to vote? If not, you can just give us a thumbs up or thumbs down, and I'm happy to mark it for you. Thank you. That carries 12-0.
Any declarations of interest? I have to declare, so I'll pass the chair to, who was the previous chair?
Me.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderbeek, if you just take the chair, I have to declare on the two items with respect to one that generally alludes to, that includes student wages, and then the other report on the actual summer student wage rate. There's a motion as well. 8. My apologies, Clerk Paparella, for not having the
7-1 and
8-1.
7-1
and 8-1?
8-1, okay. Yes.
So at the appropriate time, I will abstain and fill out the paperwork as necessary. And so will anybody else who has a declaration of interest today. Anybody else? Just me? All right. So
I'll give you back the chair, sir.
I will take back that chair. Thank you so much.
Councillor Pauls had her hand up.
Actually, I do too then in 7-1, similar as to Councillor Farr.
For
Okay.
what reason? For what reason, Councillor?
My granddaughter applied for the City of Hamilton for student wage.
And that's the same for me. I don't think I mentioned my son has applied as well to several different city summer job applications. Thank you for reminding me, Councillor Pauls. Okay, so nobody else. We are good.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure. Although my daughter Sabrina is a teacher, I think they do call her in occasionally at King's Forest. So I may have to declare an interest to prevent a conflict, because my daughter might also still be under the employ of the City of Hamilton during the summer months. So I thought I'd mention that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, nobody else. And just again, a reminder, if you have a disqualifying interest, ensure that when it's time to vote on the matter, you abstain and your disqualifying interest is noted correctly in the minutes. Those who have noted a non-disqualifying interest will participate impartially in the decision-making process related to the matter. On to the minutes of the previous meeting, February 25th. I need a mover and a seconder for those February 25th meeting minutes. Councillor Vanderbeek, seconded by Councillor Partridge. Note the clerk has sent an email to all members of council. That was last night, confirming the resolution on page 18 of the minutes, and that defers 3 of the proposed amendments to the 2022 preliminary budget. All in favor?
That vote carries 12-0.
Communications. We're in a second to put the communication items on the floor. Moved by Councillor Powers, seconded by Councillor John Paul Danko. Any discussions on those comms? I see no discussions, and so the vote is up.
That vote carries 12-0.
Mike Sagaric, our General Manager of Finance, if you would like to open prior to the presentations. Maybe a presentation on the presentations to get us started, Mike.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Happy Thursday morning to committee members and staff. I just want to take a minute just to highlight the various items that are before committee today and how they may impact the 2022 budget. The first item you'll see is our area rating review. You may recall that staff have presented two previous reports in October of 2021, as well as January of 2022 with respect to the area rating review. Today's report is principally similar to the January report with one change with respect to area rating of fire services, and Director McMullen will take committee through the presentation and through the report, and staff are available to answer any questions committee members may have. The area rating report may, subject to committee's decision with respect to the area rating report as it is a recommendation report, may impact the 2022 budget, 6.2. And again, Director McMullen will take committee through the area rating report. As well, discussion item 7.1, the financial analysis and living wage implementation option, subject to committee's decisions with respect to this issue may have an impact on the 2022 budget. So again, we'll await any decisions by committee today. As well, as it relates to the Hamilton Paramedic business case for 2022, you will recall on February 25th, you sent myself and Chief Sanderson away to look at the paramedic business case with a focus on the affordability of the business case as it relates to the 2022 budget, maximizing the grant potential, the provincial grant potential in 2023 and 2024, as well as a focus towards implementation of the paramedic service enhancement with an effective date of April 2022. And as it relates to that discussion item, that is captured under 6.2, and I will speak to our consultations with Hamilton Paramedic Services. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I just wanted to highlight how the various items may impact the 2022 budget. I believe they're reflected in 6.2. I will present 6.2 to committee members, and again, we'll await any decisions from committee members with respect to 6.1, 7.1, 7.2, and finally, the motion 8.1 with respect to summer student wages, and then we will reflect any decisions made by committee today as it relates to our preliminary budget position for 2022, which is 6.2. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I just wanted to highlight today's agenda, recognizing it is our last scheduled budget GIC, and how the various items will be reflected in the 2022 preliminary budget. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to pass it on to Brian McMullen to take committee through 6.1.
Okay, just before we get to Brian, if it's the last scheduled budget GIC, and that explains why Councillor Jackson's in the tuxedo. The other, just a little bit of a note, we will take notes during these two presentations today and then ask the questions following instead of breaking it up. We've already done the, I think, hard work in terms of presentations of the past of getting better understandings as the presentations proceed. So let's take notes and as per normal GIC schedules, ask the questions following the presentation. So thank you very much, and hello and good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Council. Thank you, Chair Farr. I will share my presentation. Just to confirm, you're seeing my presentation on your screen then, or?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Councillor, and thanks, Mike, for the introduction. I'm Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy in the Corporate Services Department. As Mike suggested, we have before you an area rating review report. We had previously brought 2 information reports for you back in, one was in September and the other one was in January. The first report just basically gave an overview of our plan, which was to bring back that report in January, and this report again in either what was to be late February or early March. We presented some alternatives and some options and some of the preliminary information in the second report. So today is primarily an update on some of those numbers, and as Mike also indicated, some discussion that we've had with regarding the fire service in particular. So as far as an introduction, a bit of a background, I will have a background. I'm going to go through the principles of area rating. I'm going to also go through, yes, a historical background on the area rating for the City of Hamilton. As a brief slide in this presentation. We did a scan that we presented at the last meeting, a scan of what other Ontario municipalities do for area rating. And then I'll be going through each of the services that we area rate and have a brief description of our methodology and analysis that we did. And then, of course, there's some samples in the report of what the impacts are for the urban and rural areas. So in general, the principles that we followed related to area rating is that it's, oops, sorry, I skipped. Sorry. So area rating in general, it's a municipal property taxation tool that's intended to account for differences in service levels or differences in the cost of providing the service, and that's provided under the Municipal Act and governed by Ontario Regulation 586-06. And what it basically does, there's going to be properties with the same assessment across the city, but they receive different service levels, and therefore they are taxed differently. So when we get into some of our principles, the area rating does not generate any additional revenue. What it does is it's a redistribution of the taxes from the different property classes. So in the case of some of these, you're going to find out momentarily that it's a distribution between some of the urban and rural properties across the City of Hamilton. Some of the other principles are that service delivery, in this case, drives the taxes. And then, historically, that's, since the creation of the new City of Hamilton, with the amalgamation in 2001, a number of discussions over these past 21-ish years regarding which services and who should be taxed for those particular services. It's not a pay for use per se, right? So the way that we create the operating budget, you generally have a gross cost, and then you offset any costs with actual user fees and other revenues, and then you have your net levy that then is attributable to how we determine whether it's part of the general levy or whether it becomes part of one of our special levies that we area rate. And some of the principles that were discussed in the 2009 and 2011 reports that came forward is that it's an evolutionary process. Like I said, it started in 2001, a number of changes were made, and then we got into 2009, 10, 11. There was a lot of discussion. There was some consultation that was done during those times, and then they came back with what was the process that was implemented in 2011, and that we've been following since 2011. And Council felt, from some of our discussion last year regarding fire area rating and the area rating in general, that we should do a review of our area rating practices. So regarding the historical background, it was 2001. The services that we area rated in back in 2001 were transit, fire, culture and recreation, storm sewers, seniors tax credit, slot revenues, financial adjustments. Made some changes in 2002. We removed the seniors tax credit and established it as a city. There was a citywide program. We removed some of the financial adjustments that were area rated, put them on the general levy. And then, as you can see, 2006, storm sewers were changed. We transferred that to the rate budget and included in the water and sewer rates. That is something that we'll be addressing in the coming months with a report back to the Public Works Committee as well. Talk about our future on the storm rate. Then in 2008, we had the removal of the slot revenues. We added sidewalk snow removal for Ward 12 only, and then we had we started with the addition of the loan repayment for the Parkland purchases, and we had it was added to the culture and rec area rate levy. And then in 2011, so that was from a series of meetings that were held between 2009 and 2011. We came up with the current structure we have now, where transit, recreation, sidewalks, and street lighting, the Parkland purchases, the infrastructure levy was introduced at that time for Hamilton wards, and then we had the sidewalk snow removal, continuing for Ward 12, and then fire. When we did our municipal scan, and it's attached in the appendix to this report, we did a scan of 44 municipalities in Ontario, and only 13 of them have area rated services. The most common are transit, fire, and waste collection, but the maximum from the municipalities that we surveyed was that they had 3 area rated services. From above the City of Hamilton, we have 8. So, you know, in the preparation and in our analysis that we did, so obviously we have recommendations in this report about a number of items that I have listed there. So sidewalk snow removal, we did a review, and there's a few reports, and I'll get into that in a second, specifically about the reports that went to committee in 2001 for sidewalk snow removal. We looked at we looked at that because we were dealing with that through those reports. Then there's also sidewalks and street lighting that is currently area rated. We were asked to look at that. We looked at recreation, the Parkland purchases, and the fire. And of course, we followed our principles, and we looked at that it's revenue neutral. It's just going to result in tax shifts between the properties. And any analysis that we did, we exclude any of the assessment growth that might be attributable to the calculations. The tax policies are not included in the analysis, or any new budget numbers that will come after at the next presentation, or the education impacts. So we focused on primarily what the 2001 budget numbers were when we came up with our particular analysis in those tables that we showed in the report, and I'm going to show them again here. So regarding sidewalk snow clearing, if you remember the conversations, if you were at the Public Works Committee and consequently or subsequently at the council meeting, sidewalk snow clearing is area rated right now to Ancaster only. All their sidewalks are cleared. Ancaster pays for that directly. $155,000 was the $155,000 was the 2021 budget, and that gets allocated to all Ancaster residents. So during 2001, though, a couple of council reports came forward related to enhanced level of service, and that'll be for the 2022 and 2023 winter season, which is the 3 months at the end of this year and the 2 months at the end of 2022, so November, December essentially, and then January, February, March of 2023. So through that report, they applied the EDI framework and determined that we would start to clear an additional 469 kilometers citywide of sidewalks. So that'll be implemented for the 2022 winter season. So our recommendation in this report is to eliminate the sidewalk area rating charge to Ancaster starting in 2023. So as we've already incurred 2 months of winter in 2022, that service has been provided to Ancaster. So it needs to be included in the 2022 allocation and tax policy, but we'll adjust for the costs that will be added to the 2022 budget for the citywide service. So that's where the changes will come through. And so consequently, when I go to the next slide, when we look at these impacts, and these were presented at our previous meetings, what you see then is there will be an impact in the urban area of all of the city, generally of $1. And then Ancaster mainly it is Ward 12, sorry. Ward 12, in this case, they will see a reduction because that $155,000 will be removed from them, and that'll be blended in with the new rate. In the case of sidewalks and street lighting, they're area rated under the urban rural model. And the idea being back in the day was that there was different levels of service and different costs related to sidewalks and street lighting, because sidewalks and street lighting are primarily in the urban areas. So what we found with the sidewalks and street lighting, though, is that the allocation base, should be based as primarily, there's pockets in the urban area that obviously don't have sidewalks, and they have been paying, and there's areas obviously in the rural area that haven't been paying. So what the thought is that from an equity standpoint is that the sidewalks in the urban areas and across the whole city should be added to the general levy. In this particular case, then there's a budget of $3.1 million that then would be allocated to all of the taxpayers in Hamilton, and there would be a shift then between the urban and rural areas. Street lights, it's the same standard of service. In street lights, we have 45,000 street lights in total, and generally it provides the same level of service to urban and rural areas. The service is generally not driven by location; it's driven more by the density and the population. So on the location of those streetlights, there has been an increased proportion of the rural sidewalks and streetlights in since 2011, when the initial work was done. Primarily, you've seen proportionately an increase of over 60%. The proportion of increases in rural sidewalks since 2011. So it's a big increase, and so then the cost proportionally have increased by 126%. Similarly with streetlights, they've increased by 12% in the rural area, and there's been a bit of a decrease of 1% in the urban area based on some of our boundary changes. So the proportion of the cost, though, has increased by 10%. So, in order to meet, it doesn't really meet the definition of a differential service based on location. So we're recommending that it be a 4-year phase-in for this one, starting in 2022. The sidewalk and the street lighting budgets, like in the operating budget, they're primarily related to sidewalks. It's primarily related to repairs, and the street lighting is related to the operating and repairs and maintenance of those street lights. So what we'll see, and like I said, it's also in some tables, a table in the report. Essentially, there's a shift from the urban to the rural. So because of the assessment base, the urban taxpayers are going to see about a $1 reduction, whereas you're going to see a range in the rural area from $4 to $6 impact for the move of these two budgets and allocation. So the 4-year phase-in, so you would see that those same sort of numbers in the future 3 years after the phase-in. Then when we get to recreation, much bigger budget, as you can imagine. The budget for recreation that gets area rated is $37 million. That was the 2021 budget. So when we looked at it, and it's been recommended as far back as the 2008 studies that recreation shouldn't be area rated, that it should be on the general levy. So the same principles and the same conclusions were found during our review this time around. And we reflected that in the last report that went to committee in January. And in our time between the January report and completing this report, nothing changed as far as our recommendations. So recreation facilities and the programs that are provided, they're available to all residents. User fees have been harmonized across the city. When there's planned new facilities in the rural areas, so we're going to see in the future, we're going to see those, whether those areas then become urbanized through the boundary changes, then those costs would have then been more allocated to those areas. So we think a general levy phase-in would be recommended at this time. So our previous recommendation, they're saying we want to eliminate it, so it still doesn't meet the criteria of the way that the services are allocated within the area rating model. This one in particular, though, when you look at the 1 year phase-in, the impact is greater on the rural area compared to what I just showed you on the street lighting and the sidewalks. So urban areas have about a $1 to $2 reduction on average, and in the rural area, you're going to see between 10 to 13. Now, the services, all residents of Hamilton can use, any particular rec center or any particular service across the city. So that's the main rationale for having it being a general levy service. The example that we provide in the report is that there's 80% of the registered program participants in Ancaster Rotary Center, as an example, come from an 8 kilometer radius. So they don't necessarily, you're not necessarily 80%. So there still are another 20% that come from other parts of the city to use the services at the Ancaster Rotary Center. Similar data is available for our 32 other recreation facilities, and it shows that registered users regularly travel up to 13 kilometers to access and use our recreation facilities. So residents aren't necessarily using the facilities that are in their backyard. They're willing to travel to use the services and programs that are available farther from where they live. Now the next one is in Parkland purchases, and I think I suggested earlier that was something that was implemented in or started to come into play in 2008 is when that really started. So what's happened over the years is that Parkland purchases, there's a number of studies that have been going on. There was a 2013 Parkland acquisition strategy. Currently, staff are working on a parks master plan. They have a survey available right now until March 20th, 22. Then they're looking for strategic direction in March and April. They're going to have some recommendations and community input in April and May, and then the final report is scheduled for June or July 2022. So that parks master plan is looking at some of the ways that obviously that we fund our parks and what our park strategy is going to be like in the future. In the past, there are deficits in parks across the city. The 2023 study indicated that there was the only areas that didn't have a deficiency was Flamborough at that time. 2013 was a few years ago, so I think it's prudent that we're doing the parks master plan and updating and getting information on those locations. So what has happened in the past is when Parkland purchases are required, staff and council have to cobble together a financing strategy. So we look at the Parkland dedication reserve that we have. We have a Parkland acquisition reserve that we've created over the last few years. We had added some capital projects over the last few years to add money to the Parkland acquisition project and reserve. So we've had a bit of a strategy to increase the capital budget for a few years to be used for these Parkland purchases when they do come up. But they should be done strategically, and that's what a master plan should identify. So the way that the Parkland purchase works right now, so generally it's spread over the former municipality, when those Parkland purchases are made, and we borrow internally from one of our reserves, and we repay that over 10 years. So the taxpayers in that particular old municipality, former municipality, would then have that charge on their tax bill for 10 years. So we looked at, how could we eliminate it? And if we eliminate it, we would have to then figure out a way to pay off that internal debt. So what we're recommending is that we would eliminate it because it doesn't really meet the criteria of the same thing with an additional cost of service that is different across the city. So we've just been using it as a financing tool rather than a taxation tool. So we're recommending that we would be eliminating that, but we would grandfather the existing ones and have them go out until the end of their loan, or when their loan expires or is completely paid off. But we're suggesting that new purchases wouldn't be area rated. So when those reports come forward, or as part of the strategy master plan, that we would have funding sources available for those, and any related impacts then would generally have to be considered general levy. So if we were using the tax supported budget to fund it, those costs would be would not be area rated, sorry, they would be a general levy. So when you put together the impacts of the street lights, the sidewalks, and the recreation, that is what this slide shows. We didn't show the implication of the elimination of the Parkland purchase, because what we're recommending is that it happens once they all finish. So we don't have those numbers at this time, because it wouldn't be until the future. So what this shows is that when you combine those three areas, you have an average impact to the urban area of between $1 or $2, and then the rural area is going to see an increase of between $14 and $19 for these changes. And the reason why we summarize at this point, and we didn't include fire, is because in the report, if you noticed, and probably didn't get a chance to read it because we sent it out late, we've had discussions about the fire service, and it wasn't included in those recommendations as implementation for 2022, so we excluded it from those total tax impacts. So when we talk about fire service, a lot of discussion last year about the service being provided in our taxation model that we used, and the analysis that we did to allocate those services to the urban and rural area. So when we did our preliminary analysis back on for the January report, we had proposed two options at that time with some impacts. But as we got into and started discussing the fire service in more detail, had a few meetings with the fire chief and the deputy fire chief about the service, we weren't comfortable putting forward the recommendations for fire service at this time. Fire service is the service model. They've been delivering 3 levels of service: the career, the volunteer, and the composite for a long time. With the fire service delivery plan from 2019, as it was presented, that obviously is evolving. Things have been changed, and they're obviously not happening at the pace that was recommended in that particular report. So we were trying to determine how the costs should then be determined, and if there is a better way, and if there is a model that we can create that does allocate the costs that are provided. And in the 2021 cost of the fire service that was allocated was $92 million. So we were looking at that and determining whether we can change the urban and rural model into something that is more based on the direct service that people are getting. So there is the option of going to a general levy, but then that would make it much more expensive for all of for the rural area. So the option that we're going to investigate in more detail is a model where there is tax rates for those receiving career service, those receiving the voluntary service, and those receiving the composite service. So the current model that we have, that's rated on the urban and rural model, that we're suggesting that would continue for 2022. and then we would review and align the taxation to the level of service. And what that would then happen, or what would happen when we finish that work, is there would be a redistribution of properties that are in the urban and rural areas as defined in the current model, and then there'd be a redistribution of the costs, and then we'd bring back and look at similar thing to what we were recommending with some of the other ones, whether there would be a phase-in of those services and of those tax impacts. So what we're recommending related to fire is that we would report back on adjusting the area rating for the fire service to the model that aligns to the 3 levels of service. We would have public consultation. We would use our Engage Hamilton website, do a survey, and that website, what we would use that for is we would use that to inform and educate the public on area rating. Last year we had a bit of an exercise with educating the public when we had the issues with our the distribution last year of the fire area rating. So we'll continue to do that work during the next few months because we want to have this in place for, I'm saying possible implementation in the 2023 tax year, because that'll all depend on council decision. So that's why I'm saying it's a possible implementation, but we would have that ready for discussion during the 2023 budget. So consequently, what we're looking at then is similar to what we did last year. The last bullet on that slide is that we're recommending a transfer from the tax stabilization reserve, and that would smooth out the impact on for the rural fire levy in 2022. So that's similar to what we did last year with the $1.4 million from the tax stabilization reserve. And as what Mike was suggesting earlier, this $1.4 million is not reflected in the presentation that's coming up, but it's available, and we'll have the numbers if it is something that council is going to approve. So with that, I'd like to thank the staff, particularly Gloria Rojas and Kirk Weaver, for their work and input on the analysis, and obviously thank the other staff that were available to answer my questions during the past couple of months on trying to clarify the information that we were put in the report and presented today. So with that, we welcome any questions.
Thank you, Brian. You'll have a few. Councillor Pearson, Councillor Clark, Councillor Powers are ready to ask a few questions of you, and we'll start with Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Farr. Good morning. And by the way, everyone, we all know that it's a Women's Awards dinner tonight, correct? Yes, hence the attire that your Ward 6 councillor is wearing. I just need more time than most to get ready. Anyways, Deputy Mayor Farr. Thank you, Director McMullen. Okay, just questions for clarification, please. Brian, you're making me nervous a bit on Parkland acquisition, slide 14. So, in the past, as you know, when especially school board sites have become available and community doesn't want to lose the green space, we have cobbled together from various funds, as you've mentioned, Parkland acquisition, the area rating of the particular ward, wards 1 to 8 in the old city of Hamilton, capital, etc. And it's helped to purchase where community has engaged and lobbied for the preservation of the green space or city assets. Okay, now you're saying you want to eliminate all that and put it all under a tax-supported budget fund. If that's correct, I just need to know for my assurances, Director McMullen, as a layman, I just need to know, because I've got a couple on the go on the East Mountain that are works in progress you're probably familiar with. I just need to know that as real estate and my office are ready to present them, if I support what you're presenting today, you don't say, well, Councillor, on March the 3rd, you voted to eliminate all these areas of previous funding, and sorry, we just don't have it in the tax-supported area. Through you, Deputy Mayor Farr, sorry for the long preamble, but hopefully Brian understands the gist of my nervousness, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yeah, so I recognize that obviously, yeah, there's a number of acquisitions that have to be in the works and have been in the works for a number of years. So what we're recommending that we would eliminate this and phase it out over the upcoming over years as those internal repayments are completed and paid off, we would still have to cobble together a financing strategy on particular on particular acquisitions. So if these acquisitions are strategic and approved by council, we would have to cobble together a funding solution from other reserves if these are strategic acquisitions. I see that Mike has his camera on.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Brian's correct, and I'll just expand on what Brian's identified. What is before committee today is to no longer practice the area rating of Parkland, and what that represents is currently we charge the associated costs of Parkland acquisition across a number of funding sources, from Parkland Acquisition Reserve, Parkland Dedication Reserve, from time to time within wards 1 through 9 from the capital reinvestment or area rating reserves. And the final source is it's area rated according to former municipality. So it's that final financing strategy, which would no longer continue. It would be applied across the whole city. It would not be applied against former municipality, but it would not preclude, and I expect we would need to continue the practice of funding from the Parkland Acquisition, Parkland Dedication Reserves, as well as there would be the opportunity for wards 1 through 9 to participate through their capital reinvestment reserves.
Oh, so General Manager Zagaric, thank you. So basically what this recommendation is if approved, eliminating, in our case with the former city of Hamilton, the wards 1 to 8 funding source. Is that correct, Deputy Mayor Farr, what I just heard the General Manager say?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. So the practice of area rating by former municipality would no longer continue. Those costs, that portion of the financing strategy would be borne by all residents. It would be levied on the general levy.
Thank you very much, General Manager. Director McMullen, thanks for the extra information, but your boss got right to the point of what he knew I needed to hear. Thank you. Director McMullen, on sidewalks, you're showing that with the recent council approved program starting next winter, you showed for my Ward 6 $1 increase. Now, I've been preparing my community for an average of, and previous reports have stated, Deputy Mayor Farr, a roughly $6 to $8 per home per street average increase. You're showing today $1. I know a number of my constituents are going to say, Tom, that's a great bargain, and I was once against it, but for $1, I'm all for the program now. Can you explain that, please?
Yeah, so through the chair, so the sidewalk snow removal that was on slide 8. So that's referring to the removal of the area rating sidewalk snow removal in Ancaster. So Ancaster currently pays $155,000 for sidewalk snow removal. So that will come off of their particular tax bill, but then they'll be added in with the additional. So they'll get the additional service that was part of the enhanced service that went forward to Public Works. So these slides are just reflecting the removal of the Ancaster area rating for sidewalk snow clearing. So I think previously, as you're suggesting, Councillor, we had shown what the additional $936,000, I think it was in 2022 for the sidewalk snow removal citywide. So that enhanced service that is not reflected in that particular slide.
Okay, so my constituents have to each pay $1 more to help Councillor Ferguson eliminate area rating in Ancaster. I hope he remembers that. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Farr. Thank you, Director McMullen. One last question. Brian, to eliminate AR on street lighting, sidewalks, you mentioned $3.1 million, eliminate AR on recreation, phase out all that. Vis-a-vis the 2.8% we're sitting at going into today's budget meeting, is any of that pushing the 2.8 either up or down? That's my last question, Deputy Mayor Farr, please.
No, so through the chair, so this is, the area rating is a shift, right? Area rating is a shift between the urban and the rural area. So the overall levy increase or tax increase that we're currently at 2.8% in the next presentation. Yeah, that does not change that number. There'll be a shift between the property categories and various properties related to the area rating. So some will be paying more, and some will be paying less.
Okay, Mr. Deputy Mayor, sorry, if I could just add on to what Director McMullen has explained. There is one recommendation in the report that's before you that will have an impact as it relates to our current budget position. If committee if the committee agrees to send staff back to examine the area rating of fire as Director McMullen has described, according to the 3 zones, career, composite, and volunteers, what staff are recommending is to defer you may recall last year through the 2021 budget process, there was a shift from urban to rural, and that was phased in over 2 years. $1.4 million was a levy increase in 2021 with a corresponding $1.4 million reserve contribution in order to phase that in over 2 years. What you'll see under recommendation F that is before you is continuing on with the reserve contribution for 1 more year to allow staff the opportunity to examine this methodology of fire area rating services and why we're recommending that reserve contribution and not passing on that additional $1.4 million onto the rural property owners is that preliminary estimates of this new methodology shows a shift from rural to fire, representing a higher cost of the service as relates to career firefighters. So to avoid swings, to avoid a tax increase on rural property owners this year, just to pass on a potential tax decrease in 2023, we're suggesting pausing on the $1.4 million tax increase, continuing to fund that from reserve, and allow staff to report back. Now, how does that tie into our 2.8%? That $1.4 million levy pressure was reflected in all of the updates that committee received up to February 25th. Oh. If the recommendation F were to be supported, and if council directed staff to do further analysis on fire area rating, that $1.4 million would not be supported through the levy, it would be supported through a reserve. So our 2.8% impact would be closer to about 2.65, and then we would have those outstanding issues, paramedic services, student wage, living wage. So again, that forms part of my presentation, 6.2. But again, committee's decisions with respect to 6.1, specifically recommendation F, could have an impact in terms of our current budget positions. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I appreciate the opportunity because I just wanted to slowly walk committee through how recommendation F does tie into 6.2, which is the 2022 budget overview.
Thank you very much, General Manager Zagarek. And I wasn't trying to get presumptive and cause you to start on 6.2, but that's good to know in terms of what we may approve with fire. And it sounds favorable in terms of which way the 2.8 could ultimately go. Deputy Mayor Farr, thank you for your indulgence, but all these extra bits of information will help me with the budget. Thank you.
And when we get to the recommendations, if I need to separate some things accordingly, I'm happy to do that. Let's see how the conversation goes, though. So, Councillor Powers, you are next. Thanks for those questions, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just going again to Parkland purchases, that's slides 14 and 15. In one of the slides, it refers to it does not meet criteria. Could I have an explanation of that statement?
Yeah, so through the chair to the councillor. Yeah, so so the area rating, within the Municipal Act, the definition, it's about a differential cost or differential service. So I think what we've been using the Parkland purchases for, it's for capital acquisition and repayment of the acquisition of Parkland. So the future service is going to be a park that is available and developed, and those future costs then are generally they are on the general levy. So we've been using it for a repayment of what typically would be a capital expenditure, just as a means of financing. So it doesn't really sort of fit the definition the way that it's described in the Municipal Act.
So just on that point, but it was very, very convenient at times because, as enunciated in the report, we have more demands and we have money, and future planning for acquisitions is years off. As Councillor Jackson referred to, is increasingly we're having opportunities offered to us by the various school boards in order to acquire those properties. I know in the past I was involved in a number of acquisitions that were area rated, and the only way that they happened was the ability to area rate them. Now, granted, in probably 3 of the cases I recall, they were area rated to, I'm going to call it the municipalities that you've defined in your particular report. So what I believe you're saying here now is that if area rating is to happen, it will be area rated across the whole city, and there's not the ability in order to save lands and have the taxpayers in a particular area pay for that over the up to 10-year period that you've alluded to, Mr. McCullen.
Yeah, so through the chair, that's the suggestion, is that we would eliminate that. But even area rating, like for those parkland purchases, we would then be recommending, when those reports come forward, we'd recommend that they be funded from a reserve that is already established. So then that reserve, we have like Mike and I both mentioned, there's a parkland dedication reserve, parkland acquisition reserve. So those particular funds then have been generated citywide. So we would be recommending in those future reports that these particular projects or acquisitions would be funded from those reserves or from a particular capital project that we might have established. And then those capital projects then are funded citywide rather than municipal specific.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I'm in my own mind, I'm not convinced that I'll support the elimination of this. It's proven its usefulness over the years, and it allows the opportunity to almost immediately respond to opportunities that are offered to all parts of the city. So I'll leave that when we get to the further discussions. Thank you, Mr. McClellan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Farr. So when I'm looking at the document, it looks to me like the document is suggesting approximately $28-30 total tax shift between rural and urban if we make these changes.
So through the chair, I don't have the table in front of me, but it was slide 16, where we're suggesting that it's about $14 to $19 for a shift to the rural.
I guess my math skills must be bad because I got it up to $28. So can I ask, you're making that mathematical calculation, what is the market value of the house that you're utilizing?
So through the chair, so what we typically have used, and it is the current average assessment. In this case, we used the 2021 average assessment, residential average assessment of $381,000. So that's citywide average. And as we've as General Manager Zagaric, I think, has mentioned in previous budget meetings, so those are based on 2016 assessed values, and the province hasn't committed to a reassessment of the properties across Ontario.
Yes, I understand that. In the 16 prices, there are many homes that are higher than 381,000, correct?
Through the chair, correct.
So the actual tax shift could be much larger than what is being proposed in your report.
So through the chair, the reports are averages, right? So based on the average of $381,000 of residential assessed value. So these are averages. So yes, individual homes are going to see some differences because their assessment is greater than the $381,000 average. Now, I'm not going to suggest that a $1 million home today, you know, I don't know what the assessment would have been back in 2016. I don't have that information handy.
No, but there are houses in Ward 9 exceeded $381,000 in 2016. A number. So in many of the suburban communities, that's the same. We seem to keep offering this. You know, it's only $18, $19, but when you actually calculate it out for many of the residents, it's going to be a much larger tax impact because of that tax shift. Is that not an accurate statement?
So through the chair, yes, but because there's averages, then there's homes that are then under the average. So there'd be those that would be seeing less of an increase as well.
Yeah, I haven't come across one that's less than 380 in my ward. Can I ask why we came up with the suggestion to use it in over 4 years, given that the actual tax shift impact to property owners is going to be much larger than what is being proposed here? That a 10-year phase-in.
Sorry, Gloria, you want to add something?
Thank you, Brian. Gloria Rojas, Senior Tax Policy Advisor, through the chair. To address some of the councilor's questions, for Ward 9, to calculate the impact, we are using as average assessment of 431,600. So it's higher than the citywide average. And considering that we are not going to have a reassessment for 2022 and 2023, this calculation is as close as we can come up with for the next 2 years. It might change if there is a reassessment in 2024. But for the next 2 years, this is as close as we can come up with the average increase for the tax shift.
So, Deputy Mayor, am I to assume, based on that comment, that we're not using the same average across all wards when it comes to area rating?
My understanding is the average of all wards, but I'll let Brian tackle that.
Well, I just heard Gloria say that in Ward 9 we used 431,000 as opposed to 381,000.
Yeah, and then maybe 286 in Ward 5. So maybe we'll just see what Brian says. Go ahead.
I'm going to let Gloria answer that one through the chair.
Okay. Hi, Gloria.
Hi. Okay. Every time that we present the tax impact by ward, we use the average assessment for that particular ward. And that has been the practice during all this time. So 392,000 is the average citywide, but the tax impacts by ward are always calculated based on the average assessment for that particular ward.
So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I appreciate all of that. And thank you, Gloria, and thank you, Brian. I don't believe I heard an answer to the question as to why they're phasing it in over 4 years as opposed to 10 years, which would clearly help mitigate some of the tax shifts that we're going to see that is going to be significant in the suburban wards.
And so through the chair, we chose 4 years as the tax shift, and that's similar to what we did in the 2011 area rating policy. We chose 4 years again. There are options. We only presented in the alternative section on table 6, we presented a six-year phase out or phase in, whichever way you want to look at it, of it. So we gave a couple of examples. In that case, recreation phase, the 6-year phase out would be between $7 and $9 rather than the 14. Rather than the, sorry, what it was, 10 to 14, I think it was. And then, so that would be a bit of a, I know one of the options that we consider, but there are other options. Mike?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. First off, I know this is very challenging for all committee members, so I appreciate tax policy is difficult to digest on a Thursday morning when we're throwing all of these figures and all of these issues before you. With respect to the time period, again, our previous practice was 4 years, but we're in the hands of committee as it relates to whether it's the desire of committee to extend it beyond 4 years. What was presented in January was the option of 6 years. Ideally, we would have had the area or the by ward breakdown that we will be providing you in the coming weeks, but unfortunately it's the same staff who do this body of work, who do that body of work as well. So to Councillor Clark's questions as it relates to Ward 9 is I know that each councillor would ideally like to have the information as it relates to their particular wards on these issues. So again, by ward, it will vary. As area or as assessment varies across wards and even within the ward it varies. Again, we present averages. 381,000 is the average across the whole city, and as Gloria has identified with respect to Ward 9, I believe Stony Creek is 431,000 is the average, and that's an average, so some will be higher and lower. Another issue to keep in mind is transit was one of council's priorities, and the 2022 budget reflects the full annualization of year 5 of transit, as well as the initial phase in of year 6 of the 10-year transit strategy. Transit is area rated as well, and that will affect the urban area. So as we present additional information as it relates to ward by ward, I expect you will see that, again, some costs are borne by the urban area and not by the rural area. And so having that information, I can appreciate would have been helpful. Again, it's just constraints. We just haven't the resources to be able to compile all that information in conjunction with the information that's before you today. So I just wanted to highlight again, future information will identify as it relates to ward by ward that again, the budget deliberation decisions will affect different areas of the city differently based on area rating, and transit being one of those services that will impact some parts of the city differently than other parts based on how transit is area rated. So again, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I appreciate I'm just adding more information over and above the information that committee members are receiving today. But to Councillor Clark's specific question over the time period, we're in the hands of committee. 4 years is staff's recommendation, but in January we did present the option of a 4 or 6 year time period.
Thank you. How's my time, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
2 minutes to go.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm trying to get some clarification as to the fire budget. Now we're foregoing any changes this year is what I think I heard in terms of area rating on fire.
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, so we would be continuing with the urban rural model for fire, as opposed to moving to the matching of the 3 service levels to the taxation, right? And that would be the work that we would undertake through public consultation beginning shortly then.
So can I ask the approved 10-year plan for the fire department? I'm assuming that the fire chief is reviewing that proposal in light of the changes that we made in terms of no urban boundary expansion.
Yes. So, yeah. So through the chair is so even I know at the time the fire plan that came forward, it was, like I said, it was in 2019. So I imagine, and it had some future works that were obviously going to be contemplated for capital projects as well. And yes, the chief is reviewing that related to the urban boundary expansion.
Okay. For all of my questions, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I thank you for the latitude. I would like to make comments at the appropriate time, though.
Absolutely. Well, next we put the report on the floor with the A through F recommendations as well, and we'll get to speak to it then. Good questions so far, committee. Next up is Councillor Pearson.
Hit the wrong button. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and certainly thank you, Brian, for the answers that you're providing, and Mike and staff. So I just touching on, I know some of my questions have been answered, starting with Councillor Jackson, but just on the fire rating, obviously, because the suburban areas went through a huge tumultuous issue last year. So just clarify then, where does what's being proposed, we're just freezing what's being proposed this year for an additional review. So any increases due to fire in Ward 10, I'm going to say Ward 10, just to speak for Ward 10. And I apologize, I can't pull my report up, but last year I believe it was 4.6 approximately as far as the fire additional costs to residents in the expanded urban area being east of Fruitland Road. So with us committing to the 1.4 million again and having the review being done, what will the increase effect be in light of what was approved last year?
I'm going to suggest if Gloria could answer that question through the chair.
Through the chair. So if we, there are two parts to the question, right? So if we don't apply the 1.4 million this year to the rural areas, these properties that last year had an additional increase because of the shift will have again an additional increase of 1.3 or 1.4 approximately. So if the average in the city is 2.8, then the rural properties for fire, only for fire, would have an additional 1.3 or 1.4. Regarding the analysis, the overall analysis of the fire service, there will be redistribution between the two areas that we have now. We have the rural area that is mostly covered by full-time firefighters, and then we have the rural areas that are mostly covered by volunteer firefighters. If we do a review in order to align the taxation with the three levels of service, then we will have three different rates. So at this time is very premature to say how much would the impact for each of the new areas, because there is one new area that we don't have, right? But yes, there would be three different areas in case that we decide to go with the review of the fire service, of how we tax the fire service.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm assuming, though, that you're saying if we support the 1.4 million to continue this year and the review to happen, there should be no reflection of an increase in fire service over and above what was approved last year, and that would be carried forward this year, as subject to obviously assessed values, correct? Which haven't changed because they're frozen now until 2024, correct? Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Brian.
So through the chair, that's correct. So and obviously the numbers that we're showing too, we're going to have there is a budget increase in fire, so that'll be part of the overall 2.8% budget increase that is in the next presentation.
Okay, thank you. So I'll watch tentatively for that. So I just want to also get clarification, if I can. What again was the average assessed property value this year? I wrote down a couple amounts and I want to be sure I have it right. So as of this year, we're still at 300 and.
So Gloria, so the numbers that we used, I think in this presentation would be 2021 average assessment, which would have been the $381,000. For 2022, I think it's going to $382,000. Correct, Gloria?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, because I heard some different numbers. I'm going, did I hear this right? And just to reiterate, and 1% of our any tax increase this year represents how much in millions?
So through the chair, we have when we look at those numbers, we look at our municipal increase and also our total tax increase. So when we talk about a municipal, I think it's about $9.3 million. When we talk about our total tax increase, we're using, I think, 10.5 million. So sorry, that's what a 1%
Right,
increase represents.
So 10.5 is an overall calculation of everything, right? Everything
Yes.
in.
Yes.
Okay. Basically, that's how. So everything in. Okay, got it. Alrighty, and I think my other questions were answered. So, well, no, I just will go back. So on the total, page 16, slide 16, the total effect as far as Ward 10, and that's how I'm going to relate it, is actually a minus $2. And that's $2 on an average assessed property, correct?
So through the chair, correct? Yep.
And that's what we're looking at. Just want to be sure it's also not just for me, but for the public that may be watching. Thank you, everyone, and I will listen further on attentively. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Councillor Danko?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just so I'm clear on the impacts of this, on slide 16 of the presentation, there's the rural areas of wards 9, 11, 12, 13, and 15 are impacted by a slight shift of those taxes to increase. And the urban areas of all wards, including wards 9, 11, 12, 13, and 15, see a slight tax decrease, which I assume that it's in the hundreds of thousands column of the percentage point because it's not shown in the chart there. But the urban areas of those wards are seeing a tax decrease double what most of the Old City Hamilton wards are seeing. Am I seeing that correctly?
Sorry, so through the chair, the last part was in the urban areas of which wards?
The urban areas of wards 9 through 15 are seeing a tax decrease double of what wards 1 through 8.
So through the chair, the wards 9 to 15 are seeing a on average a $2 reduction, and generally wards 1 to 8 are seeing either a $1 or $2 reduction related to these changes on average.
Which on most people's tax bill, I think they probably won't even notice. But since we're talking, averages across the city, they are seeing a higher tax decrease than the Old City Hamilton wards. And just on the assessed value, I think it's how it's being discussed here. I think it seems that there's an impression that if the actual value of a home is double or 3 times what the assessed value is being used, then the tax impact would be 2 to 3 times. But I don't think that that's accurate because we're talking about averages across the city, and it would be relative to, the other areas. And I think the actual values of homes across the entire city are, 2-3 times what the assessed value that's being used. So am I understanding that accurately?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, because we use, and everybody's home is being assessed at the 2016 assessed value. So any of the shifts that we've calculated, and Gloria has said that we do it ward by ward. So the averages per ward are what we show in those charts. So despite the fact that my particular home may be worth $1 million, but assessment, I'm making these numbers up, my assessment might only be $400,000. I'm paying taxes based on the $400,000 assessed value.
And again, that's relative to all the other wards in the city. So if your assessed value relative to another area of the city is significantly higher, then your taxes would be higher, but it can also be lower, I think, as you stated.
Correct.
Thank you. Those are all the questions I had. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Deputy Mayor. A couple of my questions have already been answered, but I do still have a couple. I'd like to know what happens to the Ancaster sidewalk clearing. So will Ancaster then lose sidewalk clearing on all the streets that don't meet the criteria that the citywide snow clearing is going to be done? So when they eliminate the sidewalk area rating in Ancaster, is that going to eliminate sidewalk clearing in the places that aren't on, for instance, transit routes?
So through the chair, I don't know if Gloria, if you know the specifics about that, about the sidewalk snow clearing, but my understanding is that the enhanced level of service is that there's more. Yeah, there's obviously more areas across the city that are receiving the service. Gloria, do you know if there's areas? I hope I can do this through the chair. Areas within the city, then in Ancaster in particular, then that aren't going to have sidewalk snow clearing in the future.
Through the chair, the service that is currently provided to Ancaster will not change. Even if we are just eliminating the area rating of the service, but the actual level of service will not change.
I'm sorry, Gloria. I'm having difficulty. It might be my audio here, but I'm having difficulty understanding. So my question, I'll just ask the question in a different way. So right now, all the sidewalks in Ancaster are cleared, and they pay for that with area rating. Once we eliminate the area rating payment for that in Ancaster, will their service be reduced to the same level as we will receive in wards 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, etc.?
Their current service is not being reduced was the answer. So your very good question was answered in that what they enjoy today with the sidewalks they have cleared, they will continue to enjoy. And Gloria, you are just slightly buffering, so I don't know if maybe we'll just try audio, but that was a good question, and the answer was the services they're enjoying today do not change.
Okay, so we will continue we will all continue to pay for Ancaster's service, which none of the other wards will get. Correct, Mr. Deputy Mayor?
Gloria?
The service for Ancaster will not change, but now that the overall service has been enhanced through the city, the proportion of kilometers that are cleared just for Ancaster is a lot lower than what is clear for the rest of the city. So under new enhanced level of service, Ancaster is not differential. Ancaster now doesn't have, let's say, a benefit in number of kilometers cleared compared to the rest of the city.
Okay, I'm not clear on your answer there. No, it's not about you. I'll take that. I will figure out another way to get that answer. Thank you. And so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, when this area rating, should it be approved, goes through, does that mean that wards 1, 2, 8, and 14 don't get the 1.5 million a year for them to spend on capital things at their discretion?
So through the chair, Brian again. No, so the ward-specific special infrastructure levy is not addressed in this report. That $13.8 million that is in the levy for those the former municipality of Hamilton, that is still staying in the levy.
Okay, and so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, how can that be? Because that, to my understanding, and I certainly think that one of my colleagues here can explain that if necessary, but I'm sure that Mr. Zagarek could take that question. So he worked with them. I'm trying to figure out how that's possible. The reason that they have it is because it was figured out to stop the major increases in the suburban wards. And that was a deal they made. So how is that not being affected? Can someone answer that for me, please?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the capital reinvestment reserves, those are levies that are levied against properties 1 through 8 and parts of Ward 9, that properties who were previously in the former City of Hamilton boundary. So again, that's a separate policy issue. If committee and council chose to reverse those the decision to invest in those reserves, that would result in tax reductions within the properties within the former City of Hamilton. Again, wards 1 through 8 and parts of Ward 9. So again, that is a separate policy, and in order to affect those reserves, the offset to that would be tax reductions in wards 1 through 8 and parts of 9 as those properties fund the $13.8 million.
Thank you. And so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to Mr. Zagaric or Mr. McMullen. So we're going to continue area rating for that.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, unless council directs us otherwise.
Okay, thank you. I think I have one more question. Oh, I do. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'd like to know about the multi-res and the industrial that don't get any increases. So we're still not going to have, so we're going to put taxes up for the rural area. And in the urban area, the taxes will go down minusculely. And the multi-res units not change, that we can't assess any increases to multi-res. And is it industrial as well, sir, through you?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what Councillor Vanderbeek is referring to is we have what we refer to as protected classes. And these are, the industrial class is a protected class in that the province restricts municipalities like the City of Hamilton where the tax ratio for that class exceeds what the province determines as a fair ratio. We're restricted to only pass along 50% of the levy impact. With respect to the multi-residential, again, the provincial government imposed restrictions on municipalities 2017 as it relates to reassessment and levy impacts. And as a result of those restrictions, multi-residential is a protected class as well.
Thank you, sir. And so one last question, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So does that mean that they won't enjoy any reduction either, Mr. Zagaric?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, no, they would enjoy reductions. It's the increases that we are restricted with respect to those classes.
Thank you, sir. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Partridge, I'm just going to go now because it's a follow-up to one item Councillor Vanderbeek just asked, and while it's still top of mind, if you don't mind, I know I'm going to sort of break in the unofficial protocol, but I did want to put myself on the speakers list, and I see you just popped up as a first-timer. So if I could pass the chair to you, Councillor Vanderbeek, and I did appreciate your questions on Ancaster and sidewalk clearing, and what we heard from Gloria, and we'll get her to confirm this through you, is that Sidewalk's going to maintain the same level of sidewalk snow clearing in Ancaster that they've enjoyed over the years, correct?
That is correct. That was approved in the Public Works report that was presented, I believe, was in November.
Okay, and through you, the only difference in Ancaster is that there'll be some sidewalks there that aren't part of the new process coming forward in the winter ahead. Not this, but the winter ahead, according to this budget, and that all sidewalks that are on bus routes are cleared. Everywhere else, but Ancaster, because they're continuing to enjoy their traditional footprint, they're the only one that have a few sidewalks that are not on a bus route, correct? Through you, Chair.
Gloria?
To the chair, I do not have the exact details of the service that will be provided. What I can say is that considering that now there is a larger number of kilometers that of sidewalks that is going to be cleared through the entire city, Ancaster doesn't seem to have a differential service. So before, Ancaster was clearly benefiting from having a larger number of sidewalks cleared. Under the new level of service, that is not the case.
However, and to the point that you made, and I appreciate that, I want to get, reiterated at the very least, or made clear for someone who maybe didn't get it, through you, Chair, and then just finally to Gloria. There's still that when you say their sidewalk portion, now when you look at all the sidewalks that are going to be cleared, they're actually on average in Ancaster lower than the rest of the city. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Thank you. And I'll take the chair back, Councillor Vanderbeek. I appreciated your questions and all the questions so far, colleagues. And Councillor Partridge, you are next, first time speaker.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. And one of my questions was actually about the Ancaster sidewalk. So I appreciate you asking that question. So this question is going to be for Mike. The whole area rating discussion, which I appreciate the report and I appreciate all the work that certainly that staff have done, because it is a lot of work. And but I'm getting asked by my residents. If we did get rid of area rating, and Councillor Vanderbeek did raise this, but I wasn't clear that we got the answer. But the area rating that is currently, it's wards 1 to 8, but is it not also a portion of Ward 14 that receives that benefit? I believe you said it was $13.8 million or something.
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll ask Gloria or Brian. It's former municipality of Hamilton, and I apologize with the ward realignment if I misspoke and I said Ward 9. It may be Ward 14, and I'll ask Gloria or Brian if they can confirm which ward.
Yes, there is a portion of Ward 14 that was still part of the former city of Hamilton, and they are part of that 13.8 million area rating levy.
Thank you, Gloria. And so does that also include Ward 9?
I believe there is a part of Ward 9 as well. Give me 2 minutes. Yes, there is.
So it is a portion of Ward 9 and a portion of Ward 14, and wards 1 to 8 receive the full amount, right? So
Yes.
the question I'm being asked by my residents, thank you, Gloria. I appreciate that you folks always have the answers or have the information at your fingertips. Why can't that money that's currently going to the wards, the 13.8 million, why can that not go into the general levy?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll start and I'll invite Brian or Gloria if they have anything to add. The 13.8 million is levied specifically against those properties that we've just spoken of, the properties within wards 1 through 8 and a portion of those properties 9 and 14. So the position of council to date has been that the proceeds of those taxes that are levied against those properties should be reinvested in infrastructure that is supporting those properties or in the vicinity of those properties. If it was a decision of council to deviate from that, that would require a policy amendment, and for council to deviate from that practice of reinvesting those funds within that geographic boundary.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, and you've clarified it for us that the benefit was that the benefit would go to projects, capital projects, is my understanding. They had to be capital projects within wards 1 to 8 and portions of Ward 9 and portions of Ward 14. what is the current balance in those reserves for those wards, specifically to do with the area rating amount that they benefit from? Do you have that figure?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do have the figure. However, I don't have it readily available. We can forward that information on to committee members.
So the reason I'm asking the question, and it's not to be controversial, folks, you know, there's been some wonderful, wonderful projects done in those and very necessary projects done. But again, I'm being asked by my residents, so do these wards get to not spend that money and build it up over a series of years? You know, it's an important question. I need to be able to provide that answer. So Mike, can you give me some clarity on that?
So with respect to, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, with respect to the policy, it does allow banking of those funds. As an example, within a particular ward, some ward councillors have banked those funds as it relates to our earlier conversation around Parkland acquisition, where a school board is divesting itself of a property. A ward councillor has banked those funds in an effort to have sufficient funds to acquire that property. So the policy does allow for banking of funds, and that has been a practice within by some ward councillors for specific initiatives.
Well, yes, and thank you. And to point to that, you know, the further benefit too, in those wards, you do have areas that only have the school property to enjoy as parkland. They don't have additional parkland. So if that school is sold in its entirety, it may mean that neighborhoods then lose that green space. So thank you for clarifying all that and for clarifying that the funds can be banked. I hope, though, the banking part is, you know, kept reasonable so that it's not continued, because we've had this area rating now for, I think, a good 10 years, 8 years, something like that. Thank you, Chair. Those are my questions. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Councillor. Second time, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Farr. I'm glad to hear several of my colleagues speak to the importance of parkland purchases and making sure whatever we're doing today doesn't eliminate the city's approach or availability or ability to still purchase parkland and green space when it becomes available based on community needs. So I was all fine with General Manager Zagaric 1 hour ago, raising my comfort level with his answer to me. However, Councillor Powers, in his keen and savviness, asked about, he intimated that by changing this tax policy today recommended on slide 14 for parkland purchases, in the past he was able to more quickly use Dundas area rated funds, whatever, to quickly put in a bid to acquire that former school board site declared surplus. So he just caused me another little level of concern, General Manager Zagaric, after you had raised my comfort level. I just need bottom line, Deputy Mayor Farr, to know, and I know this is important to many of my colleagues, I just need to know if I support what staff's recommending today, although eliminating the traditional former municipalities area rated funds availability, that funds will still be available based on community's desire, lobbying council, ward councillor to secure and acquire a potential site. Through you, Deputy Mayor Farr, please. One last time, General Manager.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, as Director McMullen and the councillor have used the term cobble, I expect we will have to continue to cobble funds as it relates to parkland purchases, whether that is our parkland allocation reserve, whether that is the capital reinvestment reserves in the former city of Hamilton, as well as if committee were to approve the recommendation that's before you, it would be the general levy now that would form the third potential funding source.
Greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, GM. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
And thank you, Councillor Jackson. We'll get you to receive this presentation, and seconded by Councillor Pearson then, since there's no further questions. All in favor of receiving the presentation?
Councillors Marula and Danko. I believe Councillor Danko has gone. Councillor Marula, are you still with us? Oh, hello, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I will add you back in.
No, it's okay. I was in and vote didn't come up, so thumbs up for me.
Thank you.
Councillor Marula has just appeared. A thumbs up to him on receiving the report as well.
And that carries 12-0.
Okay, who wants to put the floor with the recommendations? Councillor Nan does, seconded by Mayor Fred Eisenberger. The report's on the floor. Any questions or comments to the report? Councillor Powers, I saw your hand first, and then I saw Councillor Clark.
Thank you. When you just go to the report, I would like to be recorded as opposed to Section D. So I leave that in the capable hands of the clerk to sort that out. But I'll support the balance, but I cannot support Section D.
Fair enough. That's one that we'll do separately, Stephanie, and there may be more. So, Councillor Clark, you're next. Sorry, Councillor. There you are. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had to find the right button to push. Area rating was never intended to be a long-term tax shifting policy of the province of Ontario. An amalgamation.
Councillor Clark, you know what? You're going to get on a really good trail here, and you're cutting out just a little bit. So I'm going to ask you to turn your video off, start from the beginning. You were buffering just a little before, and I didn't break in. But with your comments now, we want to hear them all. So if I can get you to just turn your video off, and I know we'll be able to hear you clearly.
I hope you can hear me, but I'm not sure I can be brilliant twice.
Try.
I'm going to try. So I was speaking to area in the government of Ontario, and I was at the table at the time. It was never intended to be a long-term tax shift policy across the province. It has become that, but it was never intended to be that way. And the intention always was that it would be phased out over time. And I have concerns about the proposed phase out of 4 years because contrary to what's before us, there are going to be significant tax hits to many people in the rural community at a time when they can't afford it. I mean, they've had 2 years of pandemic. They've been hit left and right. Prices are going through the roof everywhere. These folks are going to get hit, and they're going to feel it. So I like to ask the question of our finance staff: how challenging would it be to come back with a 10-year phase-in for air, so that you're minimizing the impact over a 10-year period?
Mike?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe we can do that before the March 30th date. We would just have to work with clerks in terms of process-wise when we would bring it back, whether or not there's an ability to piggyback off the March 23rd GIC, or whether we would have to schedule a GIC before the March 30th date that we are targeting council approval of the budget.
Thank you. So I ask that question so that my colleagues can ponder that as we debate this issue. I think, if my math is correct on the votes around the table, that the votes are there to end the area rating today. And if that is the case, then at the appropriate time, I'd ask to spread that over 10 years to minimize the impact as much as possible. And not the area rating fund. I'm not even commenting on the area rating fund that already exists. That's up to the councillors in wards 1 through 8. They can decide when they feel that that money is no longer needed. But if we're looking at ending area rating realistically across the board, except for fire, it's my wish and advice that this be spread out over 10 years to minimize the impact. Comments, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. I missed your last sentence. Give me that last sentence again. It is your wish to spread it over 10 years. And
over 10 years.
And then you concluded, or maybe you just concluded with those are my comments, Mr. Okay. Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through you, Chair Farr. I want to start off by thanking staff for this report and the analysis, both that which is written in the report, but also through the thorough presentation in response to my colleagues' questions. I'm in favor of all of the recommendations that are before us from staff. I believe that it inherently brings us closer along to being able to plan together as a collective city towards our future and current needs for our residents. I believe it enables us to act as a collective city on major public services like recreation, parks, sidewalks, lights, and eventually fire. And with our vote in the majority to freeze our urban boundary, it becomes that much more important to start thinking about equitable tax distribution. It enables right sizing and ensuring that the distribution of taxes is enabling an expansion of services into those areas that have historically, rurally, and eventually amalgamated into our city. I also appreciate the unease my rural colleagues are experiencing right now and looking at the sticker shock, I'll say, of the impact. And I can appreciate that as a governor and your accountability to your residents. But I also appreciate General Manager Zagarik's comment during the presentations that there still remains a reality that there is still some tax inequity as it relates to transit. And especially as we continue as a municipality to forge forward with our transit master plan and move towards expanding transit services into some of those more urban rural areas so that we can all enjoy the enhanced facilities that exist throughout the city and not keep our residents kind of boxed in and instead using transit as a viable, good option to get to so many incredible facilities across the city. Ward 3 has the largest portion of those earning the lowest income. And most of these residents have been paying the most in taxes due to our past area rating tax policy. I can't support extending or further delaying or further phasing out over multiple years of area rating taxes because what we need to be focusing on is putting equity into action, including applying it to our tax policies. I look forward to the day that we can phase out area rating of transit so that we can actually expand the services and actually start feeling that collective city more regularly and do so relying on public services to get there. So again, thank you so much to staff for preparing this. I know it was a lot of work that went into this, a lot of good consideration in terms of fair distribution, in terms of fair phasing, in terms of spreading it out over multiple years. I think that that's a lot of consideration, and I just wanted to say thank you again to our finance staff for bringing forward this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nan. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the previous speakers' comments. I'd like to echo them. Each year, this body receives a tax competitive study in which it shows that incomes in Hamilton are below the provincial average and that those with the very least are paying the most proportionately for property taxes. Similarly, in injecting the principle and practice of equity, I think it is our responsibility to deal with a hangover that has been with us for far too long. I'm not dismissing some of the comments or concerns at all, but the point has been made that this was supposed to be a temporary practice. And the fact that we as a municipality have 13 services which we continue to area rate after now 22 years of being supposedly a single city, I think is emblematic of I shall say, I think we need to move precipitously to a point where we actually act as a body, a single city, because we are competing for investment, for talent, not within each other, but against some other municipalities and jurisdictions across North America. And the future of the future of this city and our ability to act singularly with purpose and in a coordinated fashion to attract investment, whether it be public or private, depends on our ability to think as a single city and act accordingly. So for reasons of equity in our future and the fact that these area ratings policies have been in play for quite some time now, I'm afraid I cannot support a 10-year shift. A 4-year, I think, is more than fair. Thank you. Appreciate and I really do appreciate the work of staff. I know it was significant, but I believe it to be thoughtful as usual and thorough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Partridge. Audio, please, Councillor. Check your wiring. You might have a loose wire. Or are you even wearing headphones? You're not. We'll give it a minute. You may have your mute on.
There
you are.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
We are having electrical problems here today, so I appreciate you bear with me. Could I just have a clarification, please, on when I look in the report says we're settled on 2.8%. Is that correct?
Mike.
Mike or Brian, 2.8%, is that where we're at?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that we understand that's the target that committee and council is working towards. If recommendation F were to be approved in the report that's before you, that brings us to 2.65 with still consideration on the paramedic business case, as well as the summer student consideration and living wage as well. So if recommendation F were to be approved, we would be at 2.65 exclusive of those other items that still need to be deliberated on today.
Okay, thank you. And so assuming, or if we do approve F and settle on the 2.65, does that include the increases to the rural area should we remove area rating?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's the body of work that we still need to complete, is the ward by ward. Committee members will be quite familiar. We have different situations across the city, urban, rural, urban with rural transit, rural with urban transit. That body of work we would work towards completing. I don't want to create a unexpected or unachievable timeline, but I would hope we would have that done before March 30th, before council deliberates on the final budget, and that will give committee members greater insight into what's transpiring across each of the wards under those different scenarios. Again, because some properties have different levels of service that are area rated and would be impacted differently.
So just to thank you, Mike, for that, very much appreciated. So this is not the final budget. Just for any residents who are watching, this is not the final budget. If I understand what you just said, there is still more information to come back to us before the March 30th deadline. Is that correct?
So through Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the report that's before you is a tax policy report, but having said that, recommendation F can impact our current budget position. Beyond that, today's agenda, you have 6.2, which is the budget update. In addition to 6.2, you have 7.1, 7.2, and 8.1, all of which may have an impact on the budget. So by the end of today, we will be able to provide committee a sense as to where we sit with respect to the overall budget and working towards that March 30th council approval.
So with the approval, thank you, Mike, and with the approval of F, bringing us to the 2.65, with the approval of the balance of the reports and the additional monies that are laid out there, increases, we could potentially end up back around 3%, but we won't know that until closer to the end of March. Is that?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and I appreciate that the agenda today includes a number of factors that can impact our overall budget position. Based on what is on the agenda today, again, I'll make the assumption that committee will approve recommendation F, which is to draw from the reserves for one additional year for fire services, inclusive of the paramedic services, as well as the additional items that are on the agenda today. On average, we should still be within council's 2.8% target. And again, I can take committee through that on our next agenda item 6.2. I'll be able to try to expand upon that.
And Councillor Partridge, Clerk Stephanie will chime in as well. Thank you, Mike. Stephanie?
I'm sorry, it was to ask for clarification from Mike, from my understanding, after Councillor Partridge was done.
Sorry, go ahead then, Councillor Partridge, and then I'll turn to you, Clerk Paparella.
Okay, but you know, I'm with Councillor Clark on this. I would really, I think for our residents to do justice to those out in the rural area, they, you know, people across the city are going to be hit really hard. We've got, you know, the MPAC reassessment coming up. Now, if we delete the area rating all in one go, yes, I hear 4 years. But that reassessment, it doesn't matter what ward we're in, people are going to be severely impacted, significantly. And, you know, I get the transit argument, but quite frankly, to drive from one side of Flamborough to the other boundary over in Brantford, it's a 1 hour drive. 1 hour. We are not going to get transit out into the rural area. The city would not be able to afford it, number one. The taxes would be through the roof. So I'm quite happy if Councillor Clark wants to bring that motion forward to phase over 10 years. I'd be quite happy to second it. You know, we have to try and do everything we can to minimize the impact on our residents. We've just gone through COVID, and we still don't know how much longer that's going to continue, although people are getting back to work. Businesses are opening up. But businesses have been hard hit, many of them closing. Some new ones have come up. That's great news. But, you know, even on the city building part of it, we need to look after our residents to be able to afford, to be able to ensure that they can afford to live in our city. So those are my comments, Chair, and I will leave it at that. And I think I'm interested to hear what City Clerk, or Clerk Paparella wanted some clarification on for Mike's comments. Thank you.
Pap?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So what I'm understanding and what's not before you today, and I'm just bringing it up because I'm afraid that there'll be a big impact and it will be caught too late, is that back at the March 25th meeting, you had deferred 3 preliminary proposed budget amendments to the 2023 budget. Those were the operating impacts of capital at $1.653 million, the Presto at $381,000, and the Hamilton Entertainment Facilities at 1.8. It's my understanding that the 2.8% that you might be sitting at now includes if those were approved. But without a reconsideration or putting it back on the table, that cannot be approved. So I've been advised that those actually need to be approved if you want to be at the 2.8%. But where it stands now, committee has deferred them, and that's what will go to council for approval, is that they be deferred. So I just wanted everybody to understand that. And Mike, if you wanted a second meeting to answer that question, we could do it on the 23rd. It would have to be a separate GIC budget meeting to go in the GIC report, but I could do it immediately following the regular one.
And that was Presto, UPEG, what was the other deferral?
Operating impacts of capital.
The capital, okay.
Because that was what approved in the minutes today as well, that was confirmed.
I'm glad you chimed in on that. Mike?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Stephanie's correct. Those three amendments, you may recall February 25th, we presented a suite of amendments, and there's two parts to those. One is those three need to be reflected as reductions in our current 2022 budget position. So each of those three items need to be shown as a reduction to bring us to the 2.8%. And then they would be brought back to council through the 2023 or 24 budget process, subject to the need of those three initiatives: the Presto, the Presto and the operating impacts of capital. The HUPEG is a reduction for 2022. It would not come back through the 2023 budget process.
Thank you. And Stephanie's put it on the screen. And while we look at that, good morning, Mayor Fred Eisenberger.
Good morning. And so Mike, just to clarify this last piece here, we're actually deferring those items to 2023 budget process to impact the 2022 budget process and keep it at the 2.8% or less.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to the mayor, the Presto and the operating impacts of capital staff have identified those are not requirements for 2022. So we are recommending that the B subpoint 1 is operating impacts of capital be a reduction to the 2022 budget position. As well, Presto, the 381,000 be a reduction to the 2022 budget position. And the third, the Hamilton Entertainment Facilities of 1.85 be a reduction to the 2022 budget process. On February 25th, I just, and I likely confused matters when I suggested that the first two items, operating impacts of capital and Presto, will likely come before council in 23 or 24 when those investments are required. That likely triggered the confusion as relates to a reduction versus a deferral. So two parts to it. All three need to be reflected as reductions for 2022, and only the first two will come before council at a future date.
Right. So I'm not, so is there something that we need to reconsider? I thought we'd already done those.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, I believe I misspoke when I said they will come back at a future council as pressures, and so they were shown as a deferral, when in fact they need to be reflected as reductions in 2022.
And that's all Stephanie was clearing up there, Mayor Fred.
All right, so is there a motion required to formalize that?
Yes, there is. Yes, okay, actually there is, because they're very different. Otherwise, we will track these for the 2023 budget.
Understood.
So I will just put in, I think it would have to be, give me a minute to look at this while you do the rest, because it's completely different there. Just
so if we need to have a motion to reflect all of these as reductions for the 2022 budget process, I'm happy to move that at the appropriate time, but I'll leave that in your hands. I do want to speak to the issue of area rating, and it's a perennial burr for our community that we were visited by area rating in the first place. Other municipalities like Ottawa and others did not have the same issue kind of laid on them. And, and I fully understanding why it was done at the time to protect against providing services that rural communities or suburban communities might not have. But all of that's changed. The equity in terms of delivering services has been actually quite substantial. In fact, it provided lift in many of the suburban communities in terms of providing services, and that has been reflected in the previous area rate change, which actually identified the imbalance that folks in the suburban communities were not paying for services they were getting at the same rate as other municipalities or other former municipalities. And so that previous discussion that Councillor Powers and others were part of in terms of ensuring that it didn't become a tax hike for suburban municipalities, and allowed for a fund to be created to create that offset and deliver that to the former municipalities that were not getting that benefit. So I've always seen area rating as a drag on our process, and the opportunity to set it aside and get past it is going to be a blessing, quite frankly. That we then put everyone on an equal footing in terms of not only the services that they've received, but the value that they are required to pay. In terms of that, now I understand Councillor Clark's desire to phase it in on a longer period, but I think 4 years is actually a phasing process that is equitable and fair, and I will continue to support the staff recommendation as it stands, but fully understanding that impact is another future pressure that has been set aside by the province of Ontario on a number of occasions, and it is a potential tax shifting that is going to be awkward and difficult when and if they actually trigger the full impact assessment that they've set aside and deferred for a number of years already. So it's going to be a significant shift in taxation, and maybe Mike, you could once again explain that people generally see this as a great benefit to municipalities, when in fact it's a shifting of taxation rather than a brand new collection of taxation. So MPAC is going to be difficult, and there's no way around it. It's not under our control. It is, the province of Ontario set out the impact reassessment processes and the timelines, and they've set it aside for a number of years, and it will come to bear at some point. So, Mike, in terms of the impact of that, maybe a brief explanation as to how that is absorbed by the municipality when that assessment actually happens.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, thank you for the question, Mr. Mayor. So just as a reminder to committee members and the community, reassessment previously, whether were 4-year cycles, every 4 years, properties were reassessed and municipalities were required to reflect the impacts of those reassessments. But because of the pandemic, the provincial government have suspended it. We know for certain it will be suspended to 2023 and uncertain whether it will be reinstated in 2024. So that represents a 7-year period, between potentially 7 years, potentially as it relates to the next reassessment period. So we expect some significant swings. Reassessment really represents a redistribution similar to the discussion that's been before committee today. It is revenue neutral to municipalities. It is a redistribution of tax burden across properties based on a series of factors, such as market values for properties, such as income potential of properties. Again, it is subject to how impact determines the value of properties. And there are 3 different methodologies on how they do that. Just as a reminder, is our last reassessment period, we saw a strong residential housing market. Residential properties, 2012 to 16, increased on average 24%. And that represented a shift, meaning residential properties had to absorb 0.5% in additional tax burden each and every year over that 4-year period, because while all properties increased, residential properties increased at a higher rate than non-residential properties. Based on market conditions and what's transpired, is we're seeing that same trend. We're seeing a very strong residential housing market, and one should expect that we'll see similar shifts as residential values are increasing at a higher rate or pace. But to the mayor's specific question, is what isn't clearly understood, possibly by property owners as well as from senior levels of government, is reassessment is revenue neutral. So property taxes are determined by 2 factors: assessed value and tax rate. When assessed value increases because of reassessment, tax rates decline, such that it is revenue neutral to municipalities. This is the point that may be confusing to many, is during periods of inflation, provincial and federal governments benefit from inflation as it relates to consumptive taxes. When housing values go up, land transfer tax increases. When car values increase, sales tax, HST increases. Municipalities do not benefit from inflation as it relates to housing values. Is that assessment is increases in assessment are netted off by decreases in tax rate. So again, I appreciate there's many pieces to that answer. Is there will be tax shifts. The strong residential housing market would suggest we're going to continue to see those tax shifts onto the residential sector. And unlike senior levels of government, municipalities do not benefit as it relates to inflation, including inflation in housing values.
You got about a minute left,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mike.
Mayor.
I mean, I think that's an important, distinction for people to appreciate. I mean, we've often said to the federal and provincial governments that we need revenues that grow with the economy as opposed to revenues that don't. And we're stuck with revenues that don't grow with the economy. We asked for 1% of the GST once upon a time, or 1 cent of the GST, because we know it grows with the economy, and that would then provide alternative benefit to municipalities to generate more funds for infrastructure and all the things that we continue to talk about. But I mean, in terms of area rating, MPAC is not a major influence. What is an influence is the service levels that are provided across the board, and how that is paid for. And we need to continue to move to equalization, because we know that when it comes to recreation centers, people go to recreation from Planbro, go to recreation centers in all areas of the city, depending on where there's availability, and vice versa. And so we're already in many respects equalized. It's just a matter of equalizing the tax that's paid to support those facilities going forward on a more equal basis. So I support that, and the less that we can have to deal with area rating in future years, the better off we'll be, because it is continues to be a bone of contention, and I would very much like to get past that as a community. And I know it's complicating for everyone. And the more, again, that we can put it in the rearview mirror, the better off we're all going to be collectively. So I'll continue to support the staff recommendation as it stands.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So moved by Councillor Nance, seconded by Mayor Fred Eisenberger. We did have a request to separate D. I have no further speakers. So, Mr. Clark, second time.
Thank you. I'd like to move an amendment that all area rating be eliminated over a 10-year period.
And that's seconded by?
I don't have a seconder at the moment.
Councillor Partridge. Amendments on the floor. Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Clark?
Yeah, I'm listening to the discussions. I'm going to suggest that as a compromise and to be pragmatic, that we quite literally look at the phasing out of all area rating, but over a 10-year period. So we'll need to get the numbers from Mr. Zagaric. But I think that's fair. I think there's going to be an awful lot of hit to the rural community in the coming years. And phasing this out is pragmatic, reasonable, respectful, and it's a way to not only help unite the city, but unite the council. Thank you.
Thank you. So the amendment is on the floor. Councillor Partridge.
Yeah, just one last comment, and I appreciate Councillor Clark bringing this amendment forward, and I won't reiterate his points, but I'm very happy to second this. And you know, when I look at the list that was provided, I can't remember what appendix it was, but there are 13 municipalities that have some form of area rating. And Mike, I don't know if when staff were doing their research, if they, you know, if they know whether those municipalities will be phasing out their area rating, or whether, you know, their area rating is going to stay in place. It's not identical to ours. A couple of them are, but they do have 13 other municipalities who are our comparators, have some form of area rating. And so I just don't feel, and some of them are the same composition as we are, Ottawa being one of them. So those are my comments, and I'm pleased to support this. And I would just ask my colleagues to support this, and also knowing that Mike will be bringing further information back to the table before March 30th to do with the area rating scenario. Thank you.
Councillor Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question through you to Councillor Clark is, I believe you indicated the phasing out of all area rating within a 10-year period. So my question is, does that include transit area rating? Or is it just what's before us, sir?
It includes transit. I'm looking at the number of votes around the table, and I expect that transit will be eliminated in the very near future. So let's be honest with ourselves, and let's just do it all and do it over a 10-year period.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark, can you then please reiterate your motion for us?
Could I?
For my own
Could I
clarity,
speak
can
to
you
the-
just
could I
repeat
speak
your
to the
motion,
amendment?
and then we have Mayor Fred Eisenberger.
The motion is simply to phase out all area rating over 10 years.
Thank you. Mayor Fred.
So to the same point, and I appreciate the councillor's distinction here. I think that's very generous, and I think hopeful. So let me ask if we could defer this decision and ask our staff to bring back the impacts on this recommendation, which includes transit, as I understand it, so all area rating, and break that down and bring that back in terms of what that means in terms of either 10-year or 5-year or 6-year or whatever. I mean, councilor's asking for 10, and I respect and appreciate that, and I respect and appreciate that we're talking about all area rating, and that's certainly a benefit. I want to understand better what that benefit is and how that impacts across the board. And so I would respectfully ask that we ask our staff to bring back information on what that looks like, how it could be implemented, if there are other scenarios that might be more beneficial over that time period, given that we're talking about all area rating. So to the mover, I would, I mean, I can make a referral motion to staff to ask them to bring back significant information around what it all that means, as I've described. So at the appropriate time, I'll probably ask you to do that, but I'll wait until all other speakers have spoken.
Okay, you're asking for a deferral. We do have two other speakers, Councillor Nan and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you through you, Chair. So the deferral is not on the table right now, which is not debatable.
It should be, but we won't. Well, let's just speak to Councillor Clark's current motion, and then we'll go back to Mayor Fred.
Got it. Thank you. So again, appreciating Councillor Clark trying to bring forward a pragmatic solution. But I have to come back down to the heart of the issue in terms of equitable tax distribution. And though a 10-year window seems maybe more palatable, I don't believe that it would be the most practical in terms of enabling this municipality collectively across every ward to enhance the service delivery and service expansion that ought to be assessed on a needs basis and ought to be done in a deliberate and informed way. And from that perspective, I guess part of the rub I have every year as we engage in this budgeting process is that we move major issues without it being fully informed at times. I'm not saying that in any disparaging way. I'm just saying I would love to see us as a municipality move towards a needs-based budgeting process that is inherently going to ensure that we are a collective city with equitable tax distribution across every single ward while we continue to expand the city to meet the growing population and also meet the growing needs. I appreciate the 10-year window from the perspective of fairness and also consideration from the pandemic impact. However, that said, we do have certain portions of our population that are faring just fine and who are able to pay and who are able to make ends meet and pay their fair share. And it remains to be the case that those of us who represent areas of the city with the lowest income continue to be paying the highest level of property taxes in the city. And it wouldn't be fair to expect those residents to continue to shoulder that burden now over 10 years instead of moving us towards a more equitable condition and situation in a much more expedited way. That is fair. That speaks back to staff's recommendations. So I do really, truly appreciate Councillor Clark bringing the motion forward. However, at this time, I wouldn't be able to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. We amalgamated in the year 2000, as everyone knows. 10 years is 32 years. To the point that an area rating was to be a temporary measure on most to enable that marriage to be conceived and happy. 32 years is a significant amount of time for us to have gotten to know each other. And I think the comparative analysis that was provided by staff shows that this municipality, a single municipality, continues to have the most area rated services. To the previous speaker's point, again, from a position of equity, code red neighborhoods in this community are paying a disproportionate amount of their income to property tax. And those code red neighborhoods primarily, if not exclusively, are in the lower city. Bumping it out another 10 years continues to protract an inequitable situation when it comes to the proportion of people's income towards services enjoyed by all. It is in, I believe strongly, the best interests of this community's future to move forward and act singularly as a single municipality so that we can chase and secure prosperity for all of our residents. I think bumping it out another 10 years is not in keeping with acting and thinking like a single city, not 15 singular cities. For those reasons, I cannot support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Deputy Mayor Farr, point of procedure. So Councillor Clark's motion, is that then encompassing all of report 6.1, in other words, A through F? Would that pause A through F at this time to be a 10-year? All of the 6 items listed by staff, would that pause them all to be a 10-year program versus the 4-year program that's identified in a number of the A to Fs, please? I just need clarity on that.
Problem, it's a great question. I'll let Mike answer that.
GM Zagaric, hypothetically, if Councillor Clark's motion that's before us.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe A would remain because that is a housekeeping item with respect to sidewalk snow clearing in Ancaster. With respect to B, C, and ultimately fire services E, that would be the information we would report back with respect to the scenario of area rating, phasing out area rating as it relates to those services over a 10-year period.
So General Manager, again, just to be crystal clear then, because I know which way I'm going to be voting on Councillor Clark's motion. But again, which ones of the A to Fs can you separate then that would not be impacted how his motion, the message of his motion would be? Can you just, so I think Deputy Mayor Farr, what I'm getting at is that if the general manager is suggesting A, E, couple of them, we can vote on separately, that Councillor Clark's motion would not impact. Let's do that separately. And then whatever his motion would impact would be a separate motion. Is that what I'm hearing, General Manager Zagaric, please?
Yep. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I can make that effort in terms of highlighting what could proceed, subject to the Councillor Clark's motion. With respect to the sidewalk snow removal being eliminated 2023, I believe that could proceed. With respect to the Parkland purchases being eliminated, I believe that could proceed. And with respect to F, the contribution from reserve, that could proceed. And then with respect to fire services and transit services, that would be information we would present in terms of scenarios on how that could be phased out over 10 years, recognizing we may be challenged as staff to implement that effective 2022. That might have an effective date of 2023. But again, we would require some time just to compile that information and come back.
Thanks, General Manager. Deputy Mayor, I'll leave it in your leadership.
Sorry, Councillor Jackson.
Yep.
Councillor Paparella also wanted to chime in on this one.
My apologies.
That's okay.
No, sorry, just when the councillor's done, I'm fine.
Okay, we'll come back to you.
So to wrap
Jackson,
up,
sorry to interrupt.
yeah, to wrap up, Deputy Mayor Farr, I'll leave it in your leadership hands how to handle this, because I would imagine maybe there's a consensus to move forward on the 3 that General Manager Zagaric says would not be impacted by Councillor Clark's motion. And then if Councillor Clark's motion fails, then we can come back to the other 3 as well as part of the original package. Just a thought for you. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a good thought. Mayor Fred.
Sorry, did Stephanie want to say something procedurally?
Yes.
I
through
saw
you-
her hand, but I think, do you want to speak?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes. If you decide today to amend this report and not approve B and C, the report will be approved as amended. So you won't be going back to, if the other report fails or the information that comes back on March 23rd fails, you won't be able to go back to B and C without a reconsideration. So if you're not sure, it might be cleaner, and it's completely up to committee to defer it to be cleaner so that you can get the information before you decide. Otherwise, you will need a reconsideration to put B and C back on the floor, and it would have to be done by motion.
Mayor Fred.
So I guess I need to be guided by what Councillor Clark is actually focusing in on in terms of his motion on the items that we have in these recommendations. So I do want to get back to the value of looking at area rating for transit as part of the all other area ratings that Councillor Clark talked about. I think that's an important distinction, and I still want to be able to refer back that issue on the ones that are remaining to get the kind of the breakdown and the information and how that plays out to assess whether or not I could support the a kind of a 10-year phase out. I'm interested in getting past area rating somehow, and I think Councillor Clark is actually offering an opportunity to do that. I think we should seize upon that opportunity. We may not agree at the end of the day, but I think we need to have, at least the information in front of us in terms of what the impacts of that are so that we can make that appropriate assessment. And I don't think we have that with us today because, area rating for transit was kind of introduced as part of this discussion, and that certainly hasn't been on the table, and I'm glad to see that it is. And so I want to see the impacts of that. So I'm going to wait to see what the specifically Councillor Clark puts in his motion in terms of the items that we have before us, and then I would still like to have an opportunity to refer back his direction or additional information.
Second time, Councillor Clark.
Keep pushing the wrong button. My apologies. So I think to clarify things, I would propose that we refer items B, C, E to staff to come back with a 10-year phase-in of those items, including transit. And what I'm suggesting to my colleagues, and I'm hearing my colleagues who want to phase it out quicker, and I know they have the votes to do it, they could most certainly do that. But what I'm suggesting to my colleagues is that it's almost a quid pro quo. If you're allowing a 10-year phase out, then let's include transit, which you ultimately want to eliminate from area rating. Let's include transit in that phase out. And as the mayor has indicated, once and for all, we can see the horizon. Area rating will be gone 10 years from now. So that's my suggestion. By all means, let's get the report back from staff on B, C, E, and transit. So we all have the numbers. But I think instead of going ahead today with eliminating area rating over 4 years for these few items, let's do it over 10 for all of them. And if the intent is to bring equity to the city, that motion would do that. I think Councillor Powers was on board for seconding it. I'm not sure if he's still.
It was Councillor Partridge.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Partridge. My apologies, Councillor Partridge. So as long as she's agreeable to how I framed that and the clerk is agreeable, then we could proceed.
I will check in with Stephanie because you've sort of amended the motion. So you're focused now on B, C, and E and transit. And I heard you say pretty much everything else. So did you catch the language of the motion as it stands now? And Councillor Clark, my apologies. I just want to make sure we're absolutely clear, and there may be a need for a deferral or a different way to approach the way we vote each item. So go ahead, Stephanie.
So I think I understand. I just do want to clarify just to be sure. So what we would be doing is referring subsections B, C, and E of the report back to staff to review when they review the phasing out of all area rating, which would include transit but not be limited to, and report back to another March 23rd GIC budget meeting. And you would be considering for approval today subsections A, D, and F. Is that correct?
Yep.
That is correct, except for it doesn't indicate a 10-year phase-in.
Oh, it did in what I typed. Sorry, I just didn't read it. Sorry about that. I've got a bunch of words jumbled together that I'm going to fix in a second.
Oh, that's too funny. Thank you.
Well, so again, now I'm trying to keep this thing on track here. So Councillor Clark, your motion, another significant change is your motion is, and it's sort of speaking to what Mayor Fred has brought up as he was kind of speaking to a deferral to get more information. You are now asking for B, the sidewalk street lighting, 4-year phase out. You're asking for staff to come back with information on what a 10-year phase out looks like, correct? Same with C and E. So your motion is now defer it to staff to come back with information to change the 4-year to a 10-year and tell us what that looks like.
Refer.
Correct. The challenge with jumping to doing it now is that councillors would not have the calculations and what the tax rates would be, et cetera, et cetera. And I think everyone would like to see that prior to the final decision. So it still gives us the opportunity to make a different decision when they come back, but we'll have all the information, which is, I believe, what the mayor was intimating that we should get before we make this decision.
Thank you. Is that it, Councillor? We have the wording and we have we have Mayor Fred on the wording. On the modified motion.
So this is pretty significant. So if Stephanie could put that up, just to be clear. There we go. Stephanie's always one step ahead. And if I had
I might need to fix the odd word.
very,
Sorry,
very serious, magnifying glasses, I could probably read it.
Want me to read it out loud, Mayor Fred?
Sure, I think that'd be good.
A, that report, and it's numbered accordingly, respecting area rating review be amended by deleting the phrase 4-year and changing it to 10-year in subsections B, C, and E. And then part B that Stephanie's added here, that subsections B, C, and E to report
Sorry,
as
Councillor,
numbered.
that's wrong. Something's wrong here. I've got
No
the
problem.
wrong. I've got the wrong
That's
part
why
up
it's
there.
called committee. That's okay.
So sorry. What that should say is, and I had it up there 2 seconds ago. I might have knocked it right out. Let's just take this right out. Sorry, I had a bunch of things written in there.
Take your time. No, it's good. We're getting work done.
I think, just to be fair, I think we want to be sure that transit is indicated in this motion. I think that's a critical element that makes me want to support the refer back.
I might still need to fix that or split it, but does that sort of work?
Sure. So it's no longer an A, it's just all one motion that reads that subsections B, C, and E to this report be referred back to staff to include in their review the impacts of the phasing in of all area rating to include, but not be limited to, transit over a 10-year period and report back to the March 23rd, 2022 GIC budget meeting. Mayor, you have the floor.
I'm okay with that. I see Councillor Clark has his hand up and Councillor Jackson, so I'll wait to hear what others have to say. But generally speaking, I'm okay to do that. Just a question. I think Mike had indicated that was it B or C that could move ahead now? And I know that that Councillor Clark has included B and C. And I thought one of them was one that could have been advanced currently. So maybe to Mike, you had indicated earlier the ones that you thought could move forward and the ones that that needed to be referred back.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor,
E.
I thought that A, which is the sidewalk snow removal being eliminated in 2023, that's a bit of a housekeeping.
Yep.
As it relates to Ancaster and the Parkland purchases, could proceed if that's the will. If I can make a comment or a suggestion, and it may avoid future complications, and maybe a question to Stephanie. I apologize. The virtual environment makes it hard to have sidebar conversations, but one option is maybe to refer the whole report to a general issues committee, budget, GIC, and first staff to report back on the option of phasing out over a 10-year period area rating services for transit, recreation, sidewalk, street lighting, sidewalk, snow removal, and fire. And we would bring that report back and or that information back, and subject to that information, then committee could once again deliberate on the report that's before you now. I'm just concerned that we may miss some steps by doing part of what's before you today, and then subsequent decisions that may come about through the information report we would come back with respect to phasing out of the transit, recreation, sidewalk, street lighting, sidewalk, snow removal, and fire area rated services.
Okay, sounds good to me as well. So I think we're all trying to get to the same objective. So whatever the appropriate wording is. So you're indicating that A and F for sure. And what was the other that could go ahead?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what I suggested was A and D, but F as well, that may not need to proceed subject on the implementation date. So for instance, if there was, based on the information staff reported back on, if there was a will to implement the phasing out effective 2022, we may not require recommendation F. So again, I'm hesitant to proceed with options, with the recommendations. It may be better to defer this item or table it until such time as staff presented the phase out of area rated services information.
And Mayor Fred, Clerk Paparella also.
You're suggesting
Mayor Fred, sorry, Mayor Fred, Clerk Paparella also wants to add to your question.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe what Mike is saying, and I'm attempting, Mike, keep freezing here, to type it, is that Mike's suggesting to refer the entire report to the March 23rd meeting, and they will bring back a supplementary report with respect to the impacts of the phasing out of everything he just listed, which I will include. And just to clarify, Mike, I got transit, recreation, sidewalk clearing, street lighting, snow removal. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Stephanie, transit, recreation, sidewalks and street lighting, and sidewalk, snow removal, and fire. And with respect to Parkland purchases, that's already in the report. That's before committee. So when they revisit this report, recommendation D, they can deal with recommendation D.
Okay.
So just to be clear, we can based on your recommendation, Mike, we can refer all of items A through F back to you, and Councillor Clark's motion can also advance with the items that you've indicated, and with a 10-year phase in, and that would be also reported back at that GIC on the 23rd.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, and again, I'm a bit of a disadvantage in that virtually I can't speak to staff. So again, we will do our best to capture the estimates. There may be a 1-year lag with respect to some of the estimates, but they will be absolutely ballpark estimates in terms of transit, for instance, and fire. So again, we will do our best to reflect as best as we can what the tax shifts would be, recognizing that they may be slightly off because of the information we'll be relying upon.
Okay. Thank you for that. And just to comment further, I mean, if I'm happy to refer the recommendations A through F. And you know what, for those that are thinking, well, I want to support those, that you may still have that opportunity, but you'll have that in the context of other additional information that speaks to transit and fire and snow removal on a phased approach, 10-year phased approach based on the motion. And if you don't like it at that point in time, then you can always revert back to the original recommendations. So I'm completely comfortable with that. I want to thank Councillor Clark for I think a very positive initiative that has opportunity written on it for the entire community, and I hope that we can fashion something that will satisfy a majority to move forward on that, because putting area rating for transit in the rearview mirror is equally beneficial as sidewalks and fire and other issues that we're currently dealing with. So I want to seize that opportunity and fully support both directions. So whatever you need me to do to refer, I'd be happy to refer that. And then Councillor Clark's motion can dance on its own.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that's your time. It's a deferral that's on our screen now. And if you would like to read that out, Stephanie, and then we'll go to Councillor Vanderbeek and Jackson and Clark for a second time.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what I heard Mike asking for was a deferral. So to keep the existing report as is, refer it to the March 23rd GIC, and staff will also report, and that will be a separate GIC just for clarification on the same day, with staff to report back on the impacts of the phasing in of all area rating to include but not be limited to transit, recreation, sidewalk and street lighting, sidewalk snow removal and fire over a 10-year period, and they'll report back to that meeting.
Thank you.
So if you refer it, you're referring it back to staff, so the report will die. So we're going to just defer it to the next meeting. Is that, Mike, is that everything that you?
For clarity,
yeah.
GM's Garrick.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that could avoid future complications if we miss a piece today. And so this may be the cleanest approach to as Stephanie's outlined it in the amendment.
And just again, for clarity on the record, is this moved by Councillor Clark, or is it a deferral motion by the mayor on, a manipulated or edited or amended original motion from the floor of Clark? Or does it matter? I seek your direction, or should maybe I ask Councillor Clark and Mayor Fred to work that out? I don't know. Clerk Caprella?
I'm fine with the deferral motion, moving it myself.
Okay.
If the mayor wishes to second it, I'm happy to have that. But leave me on the list, please, to comment. I just have one quick comment.
That's no problem. Take your time on all comments and questions. Councillor Vanderbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. The deferral has answered my questions. My questions were around the referrals, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
So I have a problem now, Deputy Mayor Farr, because the way the wording of the deferral motion is, it's speaking to and pointing to a 10-year phase out.
Impacts.
Yes. But I don't want to lose sight of the original staff recommendation of 4-year. The mayor spoke to, well, folks, you can still do that, but that's not in the deferral motion. All the deferral speaks to is over a 10-year period. I need absolute assurances, because I was prepared today to support staff's recommendation. I have been for 22 years, honored being on council since amalgamation, very empathetic to my suburban colleagues and the shift in taxes that have occurred through amalgamation. But I was prepared to support the 4 years. I need absolute blanket assurances that I could still support the 4 years on March 23rd. Through you, please.
Of course. Stephanie, give Councillor Jackson assurances, please.
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Councillor Jackson, to answer your question, that is why we went with the deferral rather than a referral. If you're referring it back to staff, it essentially dies and staff bring back another one. Deferral is the same as what you're used to calling tabling for all those years. So the original report will be put back on the March 23rd agenda, still for consideration in exactly the same form that it is, but staff will bring back a supplementary report with the additional information on the impacts of the area rating for all of those areas listed and any others that they have, so that you will be able to consider that at the time before you decide on the report.
As usual, Deputy Mayor Farr, Elsie Paprella has put an ice cube on my forehead, which I'm grateful for. Last question, or last comment. I don't eventually want to lose F, that $1.4 million from tax stabilization, because I'm sitting right now, I wrote down 2.65. I like the fact we're going lower, and I don't want to lose the potential of that, ultimately getting my taxpayers to a lower amount than even where we sit today. So fair enough. All of this will still be a conversation continuing on March 23rd. I'm satisfied with that for now. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Farr.
Okay, thank you. It's good to see you got your little notepad for the dinner orders you're going to be receiving tonight as server. Councillor Clark, and then we have Councillor Nahan.
So to the deferral then, is the fire chief present today?
I think I saw, did I see? Chief Cunliffe? No, I don't think so.
There was somebody else supposed to be here on his behalf today.
Anyone from fire, feel free to chime in and let us know here.
If not, then perhaps to Mr. Zagaric. We had a 10-year capital plan that was approved by council for the fire department that included a new fire station in Upper Stony Creek. We all know the cost of putting in a new fire station, and while much of that would be covered by development charges, I need to understand the city is re-examining that 10-year capital plan because we don't need to build the new fire station. We can modify the current fire station because you don't need the Isaac Brock station and a new fire station, 1.5 kilometers away. So is that part of the contemplation as to why the 1.5 is coming out of the stabilization fund as opposed to moving ahead with that 10-year capital plan?
Yeah, keep in mind we have a deferral motion on the floor, but go ahead and we'll get a response to that question.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the recommendation F, the reason we brought forward recommendation F is if we align the financing for Hamilton Fire Services to the delivery model of Hamilton Fire Services being the 3 zones, the career, the composite, and volunteer, the preliminary analysis shows there would be a shift from rural, so rural would see tax relief, and a shift onto urban, so urban would see some additional burn. So rather than increase taxes by 1.4 million on rural property owners this year, only to give them tax relief next year didn't make sense to us. So we suggested carrying on with the $1.4 million for 1 year until such time as we can complete that analysis and report back if we were to proceed with that 3-zone model.
Thank you, Mr. Zagaric, for that answer. And Mr. Deputy Mayor, the reason I asked that question is the fire was included in the deferral. I wanted to understand that impact before we finally the deferral. Those are all. I'm not going to comment on the deferral because we don't generally debate it. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Nan on the deferral.
Yeah, and in the interest of maybe a little bit more ice on foreheads, picking up from Councillor Jackson's point, I do want to see if it would be a friendly, and I don't know procedurally if you can do friendlies to deferrals, but if we want to do an actual listing out of information that would seek to deliver a compromise solution on an equitable area rating tax policy, I would much prefer to see the information in a 4, 6, 8, and 10-year breakdown in order to enable councillors to have the most information required in order to facilitate the shifts that are in the collective city's interests. If that would be considered a friendly, I would appreciate it.
Fair enough. That's fair game. Mike, can you do that? We have the resources by March 23rd, just to be fair to staff.
Yep, I appreciate that.
It's probably something that's achievable, but I don't want to put them on the spot. Or do you need more time, Mike?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we can embark on that. If we have to make some assumptions and just do it in a sort of linear way, we can do that. And again, I'll turn to Brian McMullen. If I'm being overly ambitious, I'm hoping Brian will jump in. Again, working virtually doesn't allow for those sidebar conversations. So if staff have any concerns in terms of being able to turn this information around, and I will caveat again, some of this information, there may be a 1-year lag, but again, they will be fairly accurate estimates, but maybe not exact.
You guys need to learn to text like teenagers. Councillor Clark, are you okay with this as a friendly? Let's look at 6, 8, and 10. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I'm happy with that friendly amendment. It makes sense to me.
It was 4, 6, 8, and 10, if I heard correctly.
You got it. Councillor Nan, anything else on the deferral? Then
we are asking, but I'm okay with it as well.
Thank you. The secondary. Okay, got that. Let's vote. All in favor?
Oh, sorry, give me 1 second.
No
Just
problem.
making sure that's in there.
And then folks, while we're setting this up, we'll do the next presentation, ask our questions of the presenter, and then maybe take a break if that's okay with everybody. The next presentation is 6.2, the tax supported operating budget.
Councillor Powers, I'm sorry, were you a thumbs up? Thank you. And Councillor Vanderbeek, were you able to vote? Thank you, Councillor Powers. That vote carries 10-2.
On to 6.2. Mike, is it Brian?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
10-2 was the vote in support. Mike, you want to set this one up too?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do have just a short presentation regarding our current position, recognizing that committee's decision on the area rating will may have an impact, that we would come back then on the 23rd to confirm the decisions as relates to area rating and how they'll impact the 2022 budget. I'll just start this from beginning. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, again, just a short presentation in terms of what our current position is, and then just a reminder as to our 23 through 25 multi-year budget outlook, and then the next steps, which will be amended to reflect committee's direction as it relates to area rating. You may recall, inclusive of the, I'll call it a housekeeping that Stephanie took us through this morning as it relates to those 3 further reductions, that on February 25th, we were presenting a 2.8% current position. However, that 2.8% was exclusive of any area rating impacts, the Hamilton Paramedic Service ambulance enhancement. You directed staff to take that particular business case away and look at alternative options on how to finance that business case. As well as you have the additional content on your agenda today with respect to living wage, as well as a motion with respect to the summer student wage rate. Just with respect to the 2021 tax supported year and operating budget, I was asked last week, are we projecting a surplus? Our preliminary estimates for 2021 do suggest a tax supported surplus. 2020, we had approximately a 50 million tax supported surplus. We're currently forecasting, these are preliminary, and I do want to caveat that these are preliminary forecasts. We're projecting approximately a $35 million surplus for 2021. Approximately 30% of that is tied to our tax capital supported program, where we are realizing some savings as it relates to debt costs and the timing of some capital projects, and that information will come forward in April in a more detailed form. But I did want to provide that preliminary estimate this afternoon. Just wanting to summarize all the decisions that were made on the 28th, as well as the housekeeping items that were approved today with respect to the operating impacts of capital and the Hamilton entertainment facilities in Presto, again, inclusive of all those amendments and some additional favorable information around assessment growth and the education tax rate. We were reporting a 2.8% position. But again, that is exclusive of the Hamilton Paramedic Service business case, as well as the area rating option with respect to F that will be back before committee on March 23rd. And again, the living wage and summer student content. If we were to proceed with the 2.8%, and I do want to caveat that 2.8% again is exclusive of the paramedics and the living wage and summer student, that would represent an increase of approximately $123 for a home assessed at $381,000, and in bringing total taxes, municipal and education, to approximately $4,480 for a property assessed at $381,000. I'm just going to go back up and just for the benefit of committee, where we were anticipating today's conversations to go, but and we're quite fine with coming back on March 23rd. If committee had agreed to the area rating recommendations, more specifically recommendation F, which was the draw from reserve, that would bring our 2.8% position to about 2.68%. And staff were recommending, you'll see in the content with respect to the business case for paramedic services, that we did take away the business case, and with the consideration on achieving a 2.8% average residential tax increase, as well as trying to realize the majority of the provincial cost sharing in 2023 and 24, as well as in an effort to implement the improved service on April 1st, staff were recommending the business case that was submitted to committee for your consideration. If that were to have been approved, inclusive of the $1.4 million reserve contribution, that would bring our budget position to 2.74%. So again, below the 2.8%. And then that would again be subject to further deliberations on living wage as well as the summer student motion that's before you today. And at the appropriate time, we can provide information as to if committee chose to proceed with those investments, where that would bring our current tax position. So again, just wanting to highlight that 2.8% does not include paramedic services, nor the living wage and summer student program. Where does 2.8% bring us relative to other municipalities? You can see that would bring us towards the low range, mid-low range, with Haldimand County still pending and City of Toronto still in the current position of 4.4%. With respect to the multi-year forecast, again, today, we highlighted the fact that some of the operating impacts associated from capital were not required in 2022, but may come before council in 2023, as well as presto pressures. And what we're reflecting is a residential average property tax impact of 3.9%. I do want to just pause here. As I've referenced previously, is previous decisions from council as it relates to the 2020 surplus, and likely the future decisions with respect to the 2021 disposition of surplus, is the uncertainty with respect to pandemic recovery and what the municipality may continue to experience in foregone revenues, whether they are recreation revenues or transit revenues, as we reintroduce the service levels and as we experience people returning back to a new norm as it relates to the demand on those services. Where we experience greater uncertainty is with respect to housing services, shelter costs, as well as public health costs. Those are commitments that we have not received, offsetting funding from senior levels of government for 2023, just drawing from our 2020 and 2021 experience as it relates to public health and our housing and shelter costs as it relates to the pandemic. We incurred somewhere in the area of $60 to $65 million in costs in each of the years 2020 and 2021 as it relates to those two programs. And exclusive of continued commitments from senior levels of government to offset those costs, those represent significant risks to the municipality, over and above some uncertainty with respect to participation and users of city services, and specifically those services that we have user fees tied to, and we're reliant on those user fees. So while we're forecasting 3.9%, there are some assumptions with respect to continued commitment from senior levels of government to continue to offset COVID-related expenses. However, we formally have not received those commitments for 2023, with the exception of some programs. There are some programs that are continuing on in 2023, but for the most part, we have not received commitments from senior levels of government to continue to provide the same level of support as it relates to responding to the pandemic. So again, I just wanted to highlight those risks, and while 3.9% is our current forecast, that may be impacted by future decisions from senior levels of government. Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, again, we'll update in terms of budget process. We'll report back to a future budget GIC on the 23rd regarding the information that's been requested today on area rating, and we are still working towards a March 30th council date for budget approval. And through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that was the end of my quick presentation, and happy to answer any questions committee members might have.
Well, Councillor Clark has a quick question to your quick presentation. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure if it was mentioned, but the interest rates are now starting to go up, and I expect that with inflation being the way it is, the interest rates will continue to go up. What's the ramifications on our city's financial plans? Can we service the increase to the, we have no choice, but what's the impact to us financially?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, great question. Inflation has been a theme during our 2022 budget deliberations. I expect it to be a theme over the next number of years. On the capital financing side, we do have capacity. So as it relates to our capital program, as it relates to debt, we do have some capacity to absorb inflationary pressures as it relates to borrowing costs. What we're seeing some more immediate disruptions and impacts are as it relates to supply chain. We're seeing challenges in terms of the timing of receiving goods, and that may include vehicles and equipment, and that's an issue that we need to take some time in the next number of months to better understand, and may require reporting back to council on alternative options on how to proceed with purchases in advance in order to guarantee supply of those services in a timely manner. As well as with respect to construction costs, we are seeing higher costs as it relates to completing capital projects, and we're working with our colleagues principally in Public Works, and we look to report back in the coming weeks, month, with respect to information as to what we're realizing and experiencing in higher construction costs. So again, the impact of higher construction costs may require some additional funding for capital programs that have been approved to date, or deferring some capital projects. So again, that is information we're compiling with our Public Works colleagues, and look to report back to committee in the near future on. And there was a last piece, I'm sorry, it just slipped my mind.
Servicing the debt.
Yes, and so with respect to servicing the debt, again, while we reduced our assumptions around borrowing costs, we've kept them around the 5% rate. And so we feel comfortable that within the next 24 months that will be reasonable, unless we see some extraordinary peaks, but we would hope that those would be time limited, that would not be structural. So as it relates to servicing the debt, again, we feel that we have some capacity within our existing financing strategy. But again, there's, beyond the pandemic recovery, and now with geopolitical issues, this evolves and changes every week, and we would report back in the future, in the future weeks, months, if we see some more significant impacts that require council's action.
Thank you.
Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Farr. Thanks, GM Zagarek. So, Mike, I listened carefully. We came into today at 2.8. If we had approved F in the previous report, which we didn't, we would be at 2.68. You briefly touched on paramedic mitigation, would take us to 2.74, but are you still reporting on that later on today, along with living wage and student rates? Or is this your wrap up right now because we've got March 23rd now forthcoming? Through you, Deputy Mayor Farr?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, again, we were working towards actions from committee with respect paramedic services, but in light of the additional information, and I'll likely have to rely on Stephanie. She'll know if this is 7.2, but Stephanie has on your agenda today the paramedic business case. You may wish to defer that item as well to the March 23rd in order to make that decision as it relates to paramedic services. And the only reason I raise that is if council is still working towards a 2.8% overall residential average tax impact, again, the information that we bring forward with respect to that alternative area rating approach may inform your overall tax position. So I'm just sensitive to what I heard on February 25th with respect to a target of 2.8%. And again, while we felt that we could achieve that with paramedic services, with the business case that was submitted, but that assumed the $1.4 million contribution from reserve. So given that now has been deferred to March 23rd, council may wish to defer decisions with respect paramedic, living wage, and the summer student wage options to that March 23rd date as well.
Okay, General Manager Zagarek. So pending how the majority of my colleagues feel, Deputy Mayor Farr, in your former days as a radio guy, you could do a wrap sooner than later today if we all want to pause until March 23rd, and we still would have then AR, living wage, student rates, paramedic mitigation before us, and still sitting today at 2.8. I leave it in your capable hands. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Well, this isn't more oldies, less talk, and I was actually looking forward to bringing to a close these other discussion items and then the motion as well. That said, and as I appreciate your suggestion, rather than leave it in my hands, I'll leave it to someone on the committee to make to defer the rest of the agenda till the 23rd. It's a good point you're making there. Looks like Mayor Fred wants to speak now.
And I think that's very wise counsel, and I'll move that we defer item 6.2 and item 7.1 and 7.2 to the GIC on the whatever the date was.
How about 8.1, the motion on student wage? You want to?
All of them, yeah, 8.1 included, yeah.
Okay. So first, then let's receive Mike's presentation, since we don't have any more. Yeah, we do not have any more questions. So received by Councillor Nance, seconded by Councillor Clark to receive Mike's presentation.
Thank you, Councillor Powers. Councillor Marula, are you still with us? I do see him in the meeting. I just don't know if he, oh, there he is. Thank you, sir. Carries 11-0.
And to defer the remainder of today's agenda, I think we could keep it as simple as that, Clerk Paparella, to the March 23rd GIC operating budget. There's two GICs, as the clerk mentioned earlier, on the 23rd. Moved by Mayor Fred, seconded by Councillor Jackson, was it? Or was it Councillor Jackson? Yeah, all right. All in favor.
Sorry, I'm just putting something in there so I can open the vote.
I gotta go get my mom some new glasses anyway today. She broke
Oh, it's filling the time, Councillor.
Yeah.
That carries
11.
11-0.
Oh, for conclusion to your vote, Mayor Fred, would you like to try to vote for a closure of this here proceeding then too? Moved by Mayor Fred, seconded by Councillor Pearson. We don't call it a recess, I guess. We just close the meeting, right?
It's an adjournment, yes.
All in favor of adjourning? That's thumbs up from Samarula and bars and electronically a bunch of others, I'm sure.
That carries.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Great meeting, and give your mom a big.
I will for sure. She's a big fan of Fred.